Federal Advisory Committee's work. For those of you who are new to the board, it's really an essential presentation. You don't technically become a special government employee until you've gotten that training. So I'd ask especially new members stay throughout that training this morning. And then we're going to hear also from Meg Cabot and from John Bursler. So with that as a brief introduction from this morning, we turn the rest of it over to Eugene.
Thanks, Rob. Just a few rules of engagement. So to the greatest extent possible today, as we're going through our presentations, if you can, hold your questions till the presentations are complete. The chair will at that time ask for any comments or questions throughout the meeting. How we let the chair know that we have a question or a comment, we'll take our cardboard, our name boards, name placards. Somebody demonstrates for me. Stephanie, Dr. Wells has done. We'll turn them up like that. And I'll nudge Rob from time to time and say, hey, this person has a question, recognize him, because he can't see everybody at once. But that's how we let him know we have a question. Again, allow him to yield the floor to you. And what I would like for you to do, Rob identifies you, before you speak, please state your name. Just simply your name. You don't have to say for the record. Trust me, you're already on the record because this meeting is being recorded, both electronically and we're taking notes as well as my note takers over there. We have limited number of microphones around the room. Basically, we have one for this side. I'm sorry, we have one for the right side, one for the left side, and two for the middle. So I'd ask you to wait for one of my folks to hand you the microphone before you begin your comments. Again, once you get a microphone in your hand, please identify yourself. A couple other things. We are virtual via WebEx, and I would say to those folks, board members who are dialed in via WebEx, to please raise your hand, and my WebEx operators will identify you, and then they'll let you unmute you and allow you to provide comments via WebEx. For all other virtual attendees, there was a typo in the notice of meeting on day 2, all right? The WebEx link will be open until 5:30 versus 2:30 tomorrow afternoon. And once again, as you can tell, these mics are hot. They may be hot during the breaks. So I caution you of some of your sidebar conversations. With that, those are my rules of engagement. If there's no questions, I'd like to turn it over to Mr. John Bursler for introductory remarks.
Well, howdy. Can you hear me better now? Oh, you're on the slide. Well, howdy, I'm John Bursler. I'm with the Veterans Experience Office. We are the executive sponsors for this fantastic Federal Advisory Committee, which you're all about to be read into after Jeff's presentation. So thank you all, first of all, for your interest in volunteering or continuing to volunteer to serve on this important committee. So that's what we're here to do. I support Eugene and Chi and the rest of our incredible VEO teammates, so y'all can make sure if you need anything, just let us know. But take your surveys too. I'm not going to go too far into what else we do. This is a small piece of our portfolio, but happy to meet you all in between the breaks. I've met a couple of y'all already, but would love to get to know y'all a bit better. I'm going first before Jeff because unfortunately I have to sneak off to what we call the VA Executive Board meeting, where it's our highest level of enterprise governance, where the secretary is the chair. So this is where we get to bring important decisions to him for consideration, and then he makes said decision usually in real time, but sometimes he'll take a day to deliberate. And so we're presenting some really neat stuff as it relates to expanding care and benefits to veterans. But it happened to be called at 10 o'clock Pacific time today, 1 o'clock Eastern. So I'll be back after that. My role is a bit different than Meg Cabot's role, who she'll probably explain, and then certainly different from Dr. Harris's role. But we'll kind of get y'all acclimated as best we can, in addition to the chair and vice chair. And thank you, Rob and Lori, for your incredible service. The overarching vision for how we put this together, and it's been, really intentional to bring all of y'all to the committee. We have 20 total members, 10 of whom of y'all are new, and so welcome, bienvenidos. we specifically recruited y'all so that we could fundamentally change the direction of not only the way the committee works, but also to positively impact this fantastic campus and the veterans who'd receive care and who will be permanently supported housing here as well. What I think our shared vision is with the chair and vice chair and Meg and the secretary especially is for you all to serve as his advisor for how to improve this campus and how to work collaboratively with the community around us to make sure that we're achieving the best economic and health outcomes for veterans as we can. Most importantly, that this is a collaborative committee. It has not always been incredibly collaborative. It's actually been somewhat combative. And I say that because it's important to remember, but also to acknowledge, but also to set the tone that we will be collaborative because our job is to advise the secretary and support this incredible campus and community the best we can. Thank you all so much again for your service on this committee and making sure that and please let us know how we can better support you during this adventure. And hopefully we can have a really great 2 days. So thanks so much.
Jeff, the floor is yours.
You want to, oh, okay. I'm gonna use one of, yeah, I want to use one of these. Test. Good morning. Good morning. This isn't church. This isn't a school board meeting. It's a federal advisory committee. I'm Jeff Brady. I'm the Director of the Advisory Committee Management Office at VACO for the Department of Veterans Affairs. I've been in the position this month, 10 years. So a little bit of time. Overseeing, thank you, sir. The check is coming. Overseeing the portfolio of federal advisory committees that VA has, 27 currently. They cover health, research, benefits, and underserved veteran groups. And the purpose of me standing in front of you both initially and annually, as long as you're on this board, is to give you what I call back a 101, or more importantly, let you know what the boundaries are of your charge. If you don't know what the boundaries are of your charge, you're likely to go over the line, and that will go on the cutting room floor. Does everybody know what I mean by the cutting room floor? File 13, circular file. That'll be wasted effort. And we can't waste your effort because we know you have personal and professional lives, and that this commitment is very important to the constituency you serve. So we are going to go through these rules so that you know what the boundaries are, so that you are more successful. And I'll tell you about your success rate, having seen the board come to life through statute and then come to life operationally in 2017 and visited this board every year. You're right around 70, I think it's 65, 70% success rate in terms of concurrence from the department, from the secretary, and enacted. So your recommendations have impact. But I want you to get up to what I consider the gold standard. We have a committee, the Advisory Committee on Cemeteries and Memorials. They're gold standard. They're at 93%. They've been there for about 10 years, and they're pushing hard to get high. I want y'all to get up there. That doesn't mean you make easy recommendations. That doesn't mean you take quick wins or anything like that. That does mean that you push harder and deeper and really pull in the supporting materials, the supporting evidence for the recommendations you're making. Can't do that if you don't know the rules. Let's get to it. Slide, please. Federal Advisory Committee came into being in 1972, so we're at year 51. Literally set the standard for how you establish a committee, manage a committee, and yes, terminate a committee. Statutory committees, discretionary committees can be terminated. Statutory committees, discretionary committees can be terminated. You know how a statutory committee gets terminated? Because it probably reaches goals and objectives, the cost versus benefit, the cost of running that entity versus the benefit that you get, or the constituency gets, or somebody in the federal government is already doing what that committee is doing. That's normally how a statutory committee goes out of existence. You know, the other one is you stop being relevant. Stop being relevant for X period of time. That cabinet level secretary, agency head will say, thank you very much for your service. Remember that phrase, thank you very much for your service. Okay? Normally we kind of take that with talking to a veteran, family member, caregiver, etc. You hear that as a committee member, normally the end of your service. Okay? But what FAC is all about is about transparency and accountability. There are checks and balances in the Federal Advisory Committee Act, which you should be aware of. You don't have to memorize them, but you should be aware of as professionals. And I'm going to hit upon those today. The accountability piece is huge. You have accountability as a board member. We have accountability as the supporting entity for your success. Now, I'll connotate what that is as we move forward through this briefing. FAC applies anytime you meet. Anytime you meet as a parent committee or subcommittee, the Federal Advisory Committee Act is large and in charge. And we will ensure that you are aware of that. We will ensure that you're aware of it. We won't impede your discussions. We won't impede your thought process. We won't impede your deliberations, but we'll make sure that you're operating on the right playing field so that that recommendation has the best opportunity to be enacted upon by this department and our secretary. There are 5 elements that need to be in play for you to be legal. First one is a signed charter. Your charter is reviewed and signed every 2 years by the secretary. That's a very deliberative process, goes to the VA, goes over to the GSA Committee Management Secretariat, comes back to us, goes to our lawyers, finally goes up to the secretary. Even if we don't change a word, that review happens. Homework, read your chart. Homework, every year, read your chart. 2.5 pages, should take about 5 minutes. If your lips move like mine do when I read, okay, read the chart. Understand those boundaries. Really well written. It's templated across the federal government. There are 1,000 federal advisory committees. When FACA came into being, there were 8,000 literally overnight. We went to 1,000. Today, there's 1,000. So FACA is holding the line. I need y'all to hold the line. Read your chart. Second one is a designated federal officer. You have both a primary designated federal officer and chief, raise your hand. You have an alternate designated federal officer. They have to be present anytime you meet. Okay? If Eugene, the DFO, gets called away on an emergency, chief is going to sit right there. He will be your DFO. If they're not present during a parent or subcommittee meeting, stop, because it's not legal for you to move forward. Again, they're not there to impede any of your research, deliberations, draft recommendations, or anything like that, but they have to be present legally for that activity to occur. That's why this is going on file 13. It's going on the cutting room floor. All right? It's just a bunch of smart folks talking. And I don't want you to be a bunch of smart folks talking. I want you to be a successful board. Okay? Your meetings are in public. Your meetings are in public, except for a very deliberative process I'll talk about shortly. 15 days prior, we put that in the Federal Register. That is the government saying, hey, this is what we're doing. This particular swim lane, this particular activity. And this meeting was announced 15 days prior, which means it's very hard, almost impossible, except for safety or something like that, for us to make it audible at the line of scrimmage on how this meeting is going to change. There could be minor changes like John going before me, or me going in the afternoon, but the content of the meeting, the activities have to stay the same because they're announced 15 days prior. We can amend only because of certain reasons. Balance plan. It was alluded to earlier of how we recruit. We recruit through the Federal Register. We share it with stakeholders. We use VA social media. We use other methodologies, veteran service organizations, to get out that Federal Register notice of solicitation which captures the skill sets, the knowledge, the experience, and yes, the demographics we're looking for, because this committee has to reflect the constituency you serve. It has to. So it's a very deliberative process. It takes a while for us to get it right. We think we got it right with this group, and we know we'll get it right with the next. As Eugene said, we'll probably be recruiting, or one of the two gentlemen said, we'll probably be recruiting for this group, 8 to 10 members in this calendar year. So a lot of thought and sweat equity goes into making sure we get that right. But a balanced plan goes along with that charter, is reviewed every 2 years by the cabinet level secretary, and has to be signed. Last but not least, records. We keep records. National Records Act, FOIA, Privacy Act, Government in the Sunshine Law, FACA require us to keep records. Anybody at any time can say, I want to copy the minutes of this meeting. And we don't make them go through FOIA or Privacy Act. We give it to them. We press the button. PDF copy, signed by the chair. Every 90 days after the meeting, the minutes are signed. So records are maintained. They're maintained by the DFO and the alternate, and then I check them. I love checking. Make sure they're in compliance. I do it annually. Next slide, please. So I kind of hit upon a lot on this next slide. So I'll talk about open, closed, and partially closed meetings because that's that deliberative process to how we get there and reflected in the Federal Register. But what I really want to focus on, especially for this group, is a quorum. All right? Third grade math, a quorum is 50% of the members plus one. So you have 20. And then we have the special rule. We have the special rule for the special groups like yourselves. Since you have 20 total, 5 voting, I'm sorry, 15 voting and 5 non-voting, the quorum actually applies to the voting members. So 50% plus 1, if I use my third grade, 8. You have 8 members present, you have a legal meeting. If you drop below that number, that becomes an ad hoc subcommittee. It can still go through the agenda, but guess what it has to do? It has to brief a summary of what occurred on that agenda to the quorum parent committee and have them adopt that information in the next meeting. So a lot of stuff. Bottom line on the quorum is work with the DFO, work with the chair, work with the vice chair to make sure that we have a quorum for every meeting. Work hard. And I'll talk about that as a best practice after the calendar. An approved agenda, kind of talked about that 15 days prior. Next slide, please. All right. What constitutes a closed meeting? For this group and its mission, objectives, and focus, a closed meeting has to hit a couple of standards. One of the standards is you're going to see some proprietary information. So let's say there was some company that had a whiz-bang app that could solve all the world's problems, but they wanted to present it to you for you to consider to recommending to the secretary. Their sweat equity, all of the investment that they made, that can be done during a closed meeting, not releasable to the public. Another one would be you're going to hear some privacy information from veterans, not public comment, but privacy information from a group of family members, caregivers, survivors, whatever, because you're considering a tranche of recommendations that are germane. That privacy information could be excluded from public view. Right? We don't want their information out there in the ether. That's not the only 2 reasons this group, unlike a scientific or research group, could request a partially closed meeting. Another example would be a tour, like on your agenda too. Okay. Again, you'll have the opportunity to see behind the scenes type things, hear some information, which necessarily doesn't need to be released to the public. But bottom line is, when we consider a partially closed meeting, that's a conversation between the chair, vice chair, and the DFO first. Hey, next meeting, we want to consider a partially closed meeting for X, Y, and Z reasons. The DFO has to write that up. He has to make that case to me, and then I have delegated authority from the secretary to determine whether or not that's good. But before I sign off, guess who I talk to? I talk to the lawyers. We gotta make sure this is legally sound. That even though I'm giving you this high-level stuff, that we have the statutes and laws that say, yes, you can have a partially closed meeting. Once that's done, good to go, you'll be back to the DFO, the chair, and the vice chair, you put it in the Federal Register, and now you have a partially closed meeting. So this meeting over the next 2 days, open this morning, partially closed, the same thing as closed to the public, and then open again tomorrow, okay? And that is in the Federal Register. That deliberative process is very important for us to go through. Has to be thought about far in advance in order for us to execute that. Again, no audibles at the line of scrimmage. Next slide, please. You can, however, as a parent committee or subcommittee, meet privately, all right? You can meet privately. But there's two broad umbrellas in which you're meeting privately. The first one is preparatory work. If you, as a parent committee, got on a phone call, a Teams meeting, a WebEx, and said, we are doing an administrative meeting, and we're just going to talk about preparatory work for the year, what subcommittee is going to do what tours we may go to, what travel, field visits we may do, that's all preparatory work. So you could meet privately without a notice of meeting, no problem. You could also do that for administrative work. Administrative work would be, hey, let's talk about the logistics of how we're moving from A to B because we're going to go, I'll make up a city, Houston, to see how they do business there. That may have implications of how we're doing it. So we're going to talk about everybody's plane tickets. We're going to talk about where we're staying, how we're going to move from A to B, C and D, and meeting rooms, that kind of stuff. That's administrative work. So those two broad umbrellas cover how you can meet privately. All right, next slide, please. But in any case, and I put it under another broad topic, administrative calls, whether it's a virtual call or telephone call, whatever. Don't talk about recommendations when you meet privately, because you just purposely step back into your role as a board. Recommendations have to see the light of the public. All right? I say, there's some nuance here, but I say don't talk about past recommendations. Definitely don't talk about current recommendations. You might as well not talk about anything coming down the line, future. So don't talk about recommendations when you meet privately. Okay. And you can read through that laundry list at your leisure. Next slide, please. Having had the honor to read through all of your bios, your experiences, your skill sets, your knowledge, everything that you express in your resumes and CVs, I know that from time to time, you'll get invited to speak to a group, whether that is a private group or a statutory group, whether it's federal, state, or local. There's some rules with that you need to be aware of. And we'll make it as crystal clear as possible. When you accept an invite to speak to a group, all right, you're doing it as a private citizen. Knock yourself out, say whatever you need to say. All right? What I think you should put in the caveat, I do not represent the Department of Veteran Affairs. I do not represent this board. I am speaking as a private citizen. I probably won't talk about present or future recommendations. You still want me to come? All right. Here's my black hat role. Failure to do that, you will hear that phrase I talked about earlier. Thank you for your service. And I will hear, I will know, we will find out what the facts are. And in 99% of the cases, it's thank you very much for your service. Here's what I would say to you, is if you have a planned testimony you're going to give to a private group or a federal, state, and local entity, staffer, congressman, senator, that kind of stuff, come talk to us. It takes us 5 minutes to make that line in the sand clear. You don't represent the department, and you don't represent this board, that you're speaking as a private citizen. You can ask us all the questions you want. You can ask us all the questions you want. A lot of head nods, we good? 5-minute phone call, folks. I don't want to have to tell you thank you for your service. That's part of my job. I really don't want to have to do that until it's time for you to roll off. Okay. Next slide. It's my favorite slide. This will get you from that 65-70% concur action money put against what we're asking to do up to that 90-95%. You do 8 to 10 out of these best practices, and I'm gonna go through them. I guarantee you'll get up there. You'll see your work turbocharged. First and foremost, master your calendar. Yeah, by the way, I'll give you a grade on that, A+. There's an A+ activity going on here. You know what your calendar looks like for the next 18 months. You've got a real good idea because your chair, your vice chair, they work very hand in glove with your DFO. But continue to master your calendar so you can deconflict your personal and your professional commitments against this committee. We need you here, not just as barely at quorum level. We need you here as members. Okay, remember what you're bringing to the table is an ingredient or part of the tapestry, part of the soup that helps make a great recommendation. Try to use sticky terms so that we tapestries. Know your role. Homework. You got part 1, read your charter. Part 2 is read the VA committee members handbook. Did you pass that out? All right. That's 15 pages. That's 10 minutes of it moving. It has your ethics training in there. It has VA policy on term limits. It has the other committees in VA's portfolio, so you have situational awareness. Please read the committee members handbook in your charter, but know your role. Subcommittees, number 3. You already have good subcommittees. In fact, you get an A+ on that as well. Subcommittees do very well through the tasking that they have. They write excellent draft recommendations that bubble up to the parent committee for deliberation and then ultimately inclusion with some editing probably in a report. So continue to use subcommittees. Consider new subcommittees. If there's some uncharted area which the committee or the board looks at, you can put more subcommittees on the list. Meeting mechanics. Meeting mechanics has to do with how a meeting is designed. And I believe your meetings are designed fairly well, probably B to B+, okay, where there's time in between briefings to ask questions, where there's time after a series of briefings to consider the quality or the content that was explained to you. And everybody, whether you're introvert or extrovert, puts their voice out on the table. Okay, that's meeting mechanic. So there's a couple of methodologies to increase that, but we'll move on. Cross-committee collaboration. I've seen this committee over the course of its 6 years reach out to other committees, invite their subcommittees or their chair or vice chair to come and chat with you about some of the recommendations or the challenges that they have as a committee. Continue to cross-committee collaborate. Smart template. In the back of your committee members handbook, there's a template. And I, as an old military guy, Air Force, by the way, Jim. We forgive you. The West Point grad, I'm an Air Force Academy grad, there's a lot of love there. But in the back of your committee members handbook, we have what we call the SMART template. It's literally from College 101. Specific, measurable, actionable, realistic, and time-phased recommendations. So when you write a recommendation in draft stage, especially at the subcommittee level, pull out the SMART template and ask yourself, okay, now that we've got this great Ernest Hemingway recommendation, is it specific? Can VA measure its progress? Is it actionable? Does VA have the resources to do that? Is it realistic for VA to do what we're asking them to do? And can it be done over a period of time? Or does it have to be done immediately? If you answer those questions, I'll tell you the secret is a recommendation may be written for the secretary, but guess who it goes through before the secretary? It goes to some action officer in legal. It goes to some action officer in property management. It goes to some action officer in DEO. And they have to, in their mind, they're trying to see if their particular staff office has equity in the recommendation and if it's really going to benefit the veterans. So they give their concur, and then Eugene and his team have to summarize those concurs into one concise recommendation for the department. legal folks have to roll in, all that kind of stuff. Smart template will get you there. Again, that committee I mentioned earlier, they love the smart template. They war game their recommendations against the smart template every time. I recommend you do that. We have an old 19th century library at VA, and they do 19th century library stuff for you. Research, compile data, et cetera, so forth and so on. All you have to do is ask your DFO, hey, can they get me X, Y, and Z, or A, B, and C by the next meeting? Most of the time they can do that. So you don't have to do it on your own time. But please use the library service. Subject matter experts, you are the subject matter experts, but you also have a Rolodex. Everybody's here, I don't know what a Rolodex is. To invite subject matter experts here to testify, to brief in front of the committee. Encourage you to do that. Annual field visits, last year, for the first time in 6 years, you went to DC. Yay! Continue to do that at a pace in which you think is appropriate. Knowing that your constituency is here, but an occasional field visit to enhance the recommendations that you're making, like cooking with Crisco down south, that's the good stuff. Last but not least, if you have any FACTA or ethics questions, don't play college student and try to figure them out on your own and think, I'm okay. Roll in on your DFO. Roll in on your DFO and ask a question. We are designed to answer your questions. There's 27 federal advisory committees. There's 32 large subcommittees that are out in the field across the Fruited Plains. There are 1,200 committee members. They roll over at 15% to 20% a year. We are designed to support you, to make you successful, not to have to say, thank you for your service. Okay? If you got fact or ethics questions, roll in on your DFO, and we'll get them answered for you. Very quick, we pride ourselves in that. Okay? Anybody have any questions? Okay, you feel ready for battle? Again, on behalf of the administration, secretary, my direct boss, chief staff, all that kind of good, all those kind of folks, thank you for your service. Thank you for considering providing your energy, your thought leadership to the tranche of recommendations that will come out today and in the future, because they will affect veterans, family members, survivors, caregivers in this constituency. Thanks, folks. I'll be around. Talk to you later.
Remember which button to press on this? Which is? All right, as tradition would have it, we'd like to recognize our new board members. They received a email from me, congratulations with their appointment to BCOEB. You believe you received a letter, and the secretary also wants to present you with a certificate. So I'm going to ask John Burchell to come forward. Meg Cap's not here yet, and as the executive sponsor, he will present you with your certificate. So I'll call you individually by name. John. Here. And we'll take a happy stamp. Ms. Nicole Bronco.
Yeah, I'm gonna start the clap.
Mr. Michael Canfield. Mr. Samuel Holmes, he's not here. Oh, there he is. Okay, I'm sorry. Ms. Sarah Hunter? Dr. Patricia Watraku. Beth Sandel? Dr. Jonathan Sher?
I think he's ill, yeah.
Brigadier General retired Lori Sutton?
That's also Dr. Sutton. All the way. I got the full time.
Mr. Dylan Tat?
Okay. Learn something every day.
Last but not least, Mr. Dave Weiner. Thank you very much. But don't get too comfortable in your seats. And I see Ms. Cabot just came in, and we're going to invite you up here shortly, ma'am. Give us a second, Joan. 1 second. Could I ask, once you signed in, Ms. Cabot to come up, and all board members, please join me to the front. This is another requirement by that guy, Jeff Meringue, for his website. Jeff, join us, please. DFO team.
Got center foot, it's high on.
There's a small account. Rob,
This is called transparency.
Rob Bakeland. Okay. Or, Jim's right here.
Sit on the shoulder.
You're a row behind and necessarily a row standing behind.
Take off your business badges.
I should have.
No, you should sit in the back.
That's my personality.
Fine. I'm gonna let you take over. Set it up.
John.
Jeff, you like?
Yeah.
Yeah, I went like this. I don't know.
No, I'm good here.
Presentations could get better over here. Yeah, I was energized.
Yeah, that's good already.
Yeah, or do you want the second? Just-
Take a go around. Are you gonna get back? This is wrong. It was see why. This went great. You're in California. I know, and I gotta go to out here. Every even six guys. Okay. I don't even. It's great. All right, count three. 1, 2, 3.
4. 1, 2, 3. Perfect. All right. Thank you. Good job, everybody. Yeah.
Second, Mark, go right.
Yeah. Which issue?
I will be there. I was reading.
Good morning, everyone. We're going to move the schedule around just a bit, and we're going to now hear from Meg Cabot. Meg is now the principal advisor to the secretary on this initiative. She's attended prior board meetings, but this is her first board meeting, and welcome aboard.
Thank you all very much, and thank you for traveling in or driving in, however you got here. This is such an important couple of days, and we're excited to show off a little bit all of the amazing work that's been going on here in LA. And really, I'm very excited to get to know all of you and to spend some time hearing from all of you. So I'm a social worker by training, and I know we're going to hear from some great social workers as we go along here. So just really wanted to say welcome and thank you. This is not an easy topic, and we'll have some, spicy, to quote the secretary, conversations, some disagreements, and that's good. That's what we're here for. We want some diversity of thoughts, really to do what's best for our veterans and their families. So I'm going to leave it at that, and really, I look forward to meeting you all individually.
Okay, at this point, I want to have a chance for all the new board members to introduce themselves, tell a little bit about their background, and also talk about some of the veteran issues that are near and dear to their heart and what brought them to the committee. So I'll start with our new vice chair, General Lori Sutton.
Thanks so much, Rob. It's really a joy to join this group. I'm an Army veteran, 30 years in the Army. As a psychiatrist, I grew up in this area, just about an hour down the road in Loma Linda. Most recently, I've had the privilege over the last several years to work with another new member, Nicole Branca, at the Department of Veteran Services in New York City. It's going to be really important work that we're doing here, building on what's gone on behind. And in the past, I know just in reviewing the actions of this board over the years, it's been phenomenal. So I look forward to working with every single one of you, and welcome.
Hi, everyone. Hi, everyone. Beth Sandor. I live in Northeast LA, so happy to be local. For the last 8 years, I've led a national initiative called Built for Zero. We're working with, for Community Solutions, a national organization. We're working with about 110 communities across the country to end homelessness among multiple populations in their community, but many are starting with veterans. And so this is an issue I've been working on my whole career, but specifically really trying to finish the job nationally of ending veteran homelessness. So excited to be part of this team that hopefully can really help demonstrate it's possible in a place like LA County to do that.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Sam Holmes. I'm very excited to be joining all of the members here in the room and have an opportunity to contribute to the conversations that we'll all have. I currently the program officer for Veterans and Military Families, the Maine Stanley Smith Charitable Trust. We focus on providing philanthropic grants to organizations in the Western United States focused around health equity, correcting justice in the VA and DOE systems, and supporting programs that are providing crucial services to veterans and military families. Prior to my role at the trust, I was the executive director for the Homeless Resource Council of the Sierras, which is the collaborative applicant and the administrative entity for the Placer, Roseville, Rockland Continuum of Care in Northern California, as well as the Nevada County Continuum of Care. I have spent the last 10 years of my career working in issues around homelessness, issues around health equity among veterans in previous roles. I'm really excited to bring the perspective, both as somebody who's worked in this field for a while, but also as a Marine Corps veteran, someone who has experienced homelessness, and somebody who has really seen the power of public-private partnership in helping veterans be able to thrive in their community.
Hello, Mike Canfield. I'm a Army veteran and an attorney and a real estate developer based out of Orange County. Focused on the last 25 years really on fighting market rate housing, primarily in the Inland Empire, Orange County, not this part of town whatsoever. So I'm coming in with no conflicts of interest at all. But I do have as the actor says, a certain set of skills that I've developed over my career that I think may be useful in this context. And, I know really nothing at all about homelessness, other than that I see it's an issue affecting our veterans, and I'd like to be able to provide my skills to help.
Thank you. Good to be here. My name is Dylan Tett. I am based in New Orleans. A long time ago, I did serve as an infantryman. Pioneered the initial striker brigade at Fort Lewis, tested those strikers, fielded them, tested them, and then conducted operations in Iraq. That was a long, long time ago. I've worn several different hats since then. When I redeployed, I landed in New Orleans 3 months before Hurricane Katrina. My life changed again. New Orleans, by the way, was one of the first, if not the, I think, to functionally end homelessness. About 10 years ago, I had sort of took it upon myself to do something about what I was just casually observing in my friends who were coming home with this thing called traumatic brain injury. And so I founded and built from the ground up an intentional community to support warriors and their families living with life-altering injuries. It's called Bastion. To the naked eye, it's 5.5-acre campus with 58 apartment homes, a wellness facility, and a program to keep them thriving. The model we use is something called intentional neighboring, but we recruited neighbors to live next door and support these families, become part of the care team. So it's going very well. I stepped down as the executive director last year and have been adventuring all over the world really this last year. And now I've landed with a really smart group of people that are based in DC, but I'm working on a climate and health project with the VA's the Public Health National Program Office headquartered in Palo Alto. Great to be here. Look forward to meeting you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Sarah Hunter. I'm a senior behavioral scientist at the RAND Corporation, which is just down the road in Santa Monica. I'm trained as a social psychologist, and I've been working at RAND since 2000 and living in the West LA area from 2000 to 2020. During that time, I observed, riding my bike around town, the extent of homelessness just build and build. I worked primarily in the first decade here on publicly funded substance use treatment, trying to improve service delivery in those settings and integrate it with mental health care. About 15 years ago, I started working with the supportive housing area with Skid Row Housing Trust located in downtown LA, helping them improve service delivery and integrate behavioral health care into their setting and measure it. From there, I started performing evaluations on supportive housing, looking at the cost savings or cost impacts of those programs of putting people into supportive housing. And then a few years ago, I had the opportunity to study veterans specifically. We recruited 25 veterans living on the streets in and around this campus and followed them for a year to see what happened in terms of their well-being and housing status. Only 3 of the 25 found a permanent housing solution, which was kind of surprising to me. I'm seeing now that they're building a lot more here, so that's really encouraging. And I'm hoping, the stories that we documented will be helpful to helping plan out this campus.
Hey, everybody. Good morning. My name is Dave Weiner. I'm the former VISN 22 Chief of Police. It's a bit nostalgic for me to be here today. I spent a lot of time in this room and on this campus and know many of the issues that are here. When I retired in 2019, or so I thought I retired, I went to work and currently train first responders how to deal with our veterans in an empathetic and compassionate manner and divert them from the criminal justice system into a system of care. So that's what we really focus on. And I'm really looking forward to working with everybody on the committee and super grateful to be here.
Good morning, everyone. Nicole Branca. I am from New York City. I've worked in housing and homelessness for over 20 years, mostly in supportive housing. I spent 6 or 7 years running the New York City Continuum of Care, and then I spent 5 years working for the government in New York City and with the retired Brigadier General. And we, in those 5 years, a very hard job, but a job I loved. We ended chronic veteran homelessness in New York City and reduced overall veteran homelessness by 90% and kept it down. We're still, I believe the numbers are still very, very low in New York. So I'm happy, very, very happy to be back in the veteran space and have this opportunity to work with all of you. I'm also here because the last 3 years I've run an organization called New Destiny Housing. We are a nonprofit developer of supportive housing specifically for survivors of domestic violence. And we also build programs and services for survivors and their families as well. Forward to working with you all.
Good morning. My name is Patricia Wajuaku, and I am currently on faculty at UCLA. I'm an anesthesiologist by training, and I'm also currently working, I work part-time at the VA as well as an anesthesiologist, full-time at UCLA. And part of my role there actually, about a year ago, a little over a year ago now, I became the medical director of anesthesiology at Martin Luther King Hospital, which is in South LA. And so for anyone who is unfamiliar with that particular demographic, we serve a very special demographic of people who are near and dear to my heart. And I do a lot of work in health equity within that space. And just in terms of my relationship with the VA, or in terms of the military, I was on active duty as a flight surgeon in the Air Force. I did that until about 2015. And so this particular, this committee, I was actually recommended by the ASA for this committee based on some of the work that they've seen that I've done. And so it's very near and dear to my heart. I'm very excited to be a part of this committee and to bring my perspective and hopefully valuable input to the committee. So thank you very much.
Welcome aboard, all of you. I can't tell you how gratifying it is to continue to meet people who care so deeply about these issues and who have devoted so much of their professional and personal lives. So it should give us a lot of confidence about our ability to tackle some issues.
Mr. Chair, can I make a point of order? So I apologize for not, Jeff Marini for the, I was gonna say for the record. You told me not to. I apologize for not making this crystal clear during my briefing, but you see assembled at the table, both board members and invited guests. Difference is board members can deliberate and vote on recommendations. Invited guests can provide their comments, perspective, et cetera, so forth, so on. But they will not, again, interfere with your deliberations or vote on recommendations. I say that because we have many members of the public, both here and online, and it could get confusing. To conflict that confusion, the board members will deliberate and vote on recommendations. Everyone else is an invited guest. Thank you.
That's good clarification. I'll give you an example of how this often comes up. Keith Harris is a SES, senior executive servant with the agency. One of his principal responsibilities is LA homelessness. So as a board, we're going to ask lots of questions. And we may even ask questions about how he feels about the way we phrase recommendations. But what's most important is that you understand all he can do is offer his personal views, and ultimately you each have to vote your conscience on particular recommendations. And so there are 15 voting members and 5 non-voting members. Those are the folks that deliberate over the form of recommendations and then choose to either adopt them or reject them. I wanted to take just a few minutes to tell you that 3 years ago, I was where a lot of you are who are new board members. I was joining a federal advisory committee, and the purpose of the committee was laudable and it was super admirable, but I often had a hard time figuring out kind of the forest from the trees. And so in the process of leading up to this meeting, I tried to step back and figure out what would be the 2 or 3 things I would have liked to have known when I first became a board member. So the first part of that is I went back and I printed up for each of you a copy of all of this committee's past recommendations and the secretary's response to each. It is, I hope, encouraging reading, because I think when you read through it, you'll realize we've been focused on the right issues. Something that's really important for you to know is, while our objective is to offer recommendations to the secretary, each one of these recommendations and the agency's response is then sent to Congress. So each of these documents ultimately went to the Veteran Affairs Committees of both the Senate and the House. Now, the reason I underscore that is because much of what we're doing here is novel. It's not been attempted before. And so we end up in a situation where legal authorities or funding authorities or other authorities don't neatly fit anything that we're doing. And so what I would encourage you to do is, as you look through this binder, think about this question of who are our audiences as a board? We know that Congress set up this committee to provide advice and recommendations to the Congress, but we also know that ultimately the Congress then sees these recommendations and the Secretary's response and can choose to legislate in this area if they think it's necessary. So I want to ask Eugene or Cheeto pass out the naming slides that I had printed up this morning, just to illustrate a concept.
Mr. Chair, as the vice chair and a new member, it strikes me as, it's great to learn about our fellow new members, but it would be really great as well. Could we just go around and have every current member of the board who's not a new member, just give just a brief little snippet of their background so we have a full picture of our board?
Sure. Jim, why don't you lead off?
Jim Zenner, Director of LA County Department of Military Veteran Affairs, Army veteran, second to none. Was in that Stryker Brigade, 114 Cav, but social worker by trade and just proud member of the One Team, work very closely with LA County, or Greater LA. Awesome.
Good morning, everybody. Keith Boylan. I am the Undersecretary for the California Department of Veterans Affairs. I came up working in the nonprofit world in San Francisco for many, many years and was appointed by Jerry Brown, Governor Brown in 2013 as Deputy Secretary and subsequently by Governor Newsom to Undersecretary. Been on the committee for a little bit now. I know many of you from other parts, some of the new members as well. So glad to meet you all and happy to be here.
Hello, Sean Van Diver. I live in San Diego. I'm a Navy veteran, and I served for 12 years from 01 to 2013. Today, I do I'm twin-headed. I'm the VP of External Affairs at a company called Athenian Group, which is a minority-owned business. We work with cities, counties, other government entities in the private sector, management consultant. And then I lead the global effort to help Afghans get out of Afghanistan. It's called Afghan Evac Group, State Department, White House, DoD. And actually, 12 hours ago, I landed from a trip to all the various processing sites. The last one was in Qatar, so very tired.
Good morning, Stephanie Cohen. Nice to meet all of you new board members and some of you who I've worked with in the past. I'm one of the non-veterans on the board. I'm the granddaughter of 2 World War II veterans. And I've been engaged in the West LA community and the West LA VA I've lived in the West LA community for 34 years, but I have been engaged with the VA since about 2012. I have a career in government. I worked for the state legislature for a number of years and then for the County of Los Angeles for the Board of Supervisors. I've always worked on policy related to Health and Human Services, and at the time that I started working in government, Health and Human Services included homelessness and housing. It wasn't separate the way that it is now. I currently serve as the Associate Vice President of Health Policy at the University of Southern California. Although I am a Bruin, I'll just say that really quickly. Go Bruins. And I cover federal, state, and local health policy on behalf of the University and Keck Medicine of USC. My connection to veterans is, I think, deeper than just the community and my grandparents or my grandfathers. I did a lot of work at the state and county level on Veterans Affairs. I wrote the motion alongside Director Zenner to create and establish the first ever veteran suicide review team. Something that's near and dear to my heart is veteran suicide, veteran mental health. And just overall health for veterans. So I'm here because I'm committed to the population. It's something I'm passionate about. Has nothing to do with my job that I'm doing now, but I am happy to be here and be continuing on the board. So thank you.
I'm Mark Wellish. I'm a retired orthopedic surgeon. I was in 1969 through 71. Battalion surgeon to the 82nd Airborne, and then the assistant division surgeon. I had almost no experience in homelessness other than this board. I trained at this institution right after I got out of the service and practiced in the Valley and taught the veterans, the residents at the veterans in Sepulveda. So I'm a neighbor. That's why I'm here.
Good morning, Amy. I think you're on the line. If you could go ahead and introduce yourself.
Good morning, everyone. Amy Pila Bravo. I apologize for not being there in person. I'm still recovering from surgery. Air Force veteran, been going 13 years strong now. I'm also the director of the Los Angeles Veterans Collaborative, which is the network of private, public, and government organizations that provide services to veterans and their families throughout Los Angeles County. And our intention is to help remove any barriers that our service members or their families face when they're trying to access care. So happy to be here. Thank you.
Dr. Sharon, if you could please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your background and how you came to veteran issues.
Hi. Don't like masks, but I've been sick. I'm just tested negative, but I figured I should. Long story, I'll try to make it short. I trained at UCLA in the psychiatry residency program. Psychiatrist, neurobiologist. Got my very first job right out of residency here at West LA. Psychiatrist, ran one of the inpatient wards. Over time, took on more and more responsibility for the emergency department, for all the programs here. Ran mental health for the Miami VA. Worked with Secretary Bob McDonnell on the settlement and the master plan for this property. And then I had a 6-year stint as the director of mental health for the County of Los Angeles. Did a lot of work with this VA and found that to be actually really quite encouraging. And it's an honor to be on this board, was involved in writing the legislation that led to the creation of the board, and have a lot of thoughts and so much opportunity. Thanks.
Life comes full circle at moments like this, doesn't it? So John, you're going to be presented your certificate by Eugene. Okay, so to circle back to where we were, I want to remind you all what Congress told this committee its objective should be. This is set forth in the West LA Leasing Act. And I want to read this because I think Congress, to use an Air Force expression, Jeff, asked us to aim high with this committee. So I'm going to read exactly what the Congress said the purposes of this committee. Identify the goals of the community and veteran partnership. Provide advice and recommendations to the Secretary to improve services and outcomes for veterans, members of the armed forces, and the families of such veterans and members. And finally, provide advice and recommendations on the implementation of the draft master plan approved by the Secretary on January 28, 2016, and on the creation and implementation of any successor master plans. We should all have in mind, Congress asked us to aim high. This committee's charter is not a modest charter. And the reason for that is because the opportunities here are quite substantial. So with that as forgive me for sermonizing, but I think what we have here is an incredible opportunity. I want to take you to one example of how this committee worked over time with respect to recommendations it offered, and how that experience probably tells us something about the process. So when I went back through and looked at the committee's past work, there was this issue of naming and assigning names to things on campus. And so I've got 4 slides here that summarize the recommendations. You'll see these and the full responses in the binders you have. But it started as early as May of 2020. At that time, the members of the board suggested that a gate on the west end of the campus should be named in honor of Carolina Winston Berry. Now, she's a descendant of the original members. So the notion was that we should recognize her contributions and her family's contributions with her passing. The agency did not agree at the time. There's sensitivities about naming anything on the campus, and especially about naming them for non-veterans. So that was an early example of something. I don't think it told us very much other than we had to explore the issue more. The next recommendation that related to naming was from about a year later. That was the 13th meeting of this committee. And that was 13-06. There's a columbarium that's on the campus now, and that columbarium was built in the last few years, and the recommendation was made. We ought to name the drive that enters that columbarium in the name of a former Army officer, Dick Littleson. Same thing. Secretary did not concur. Something that we're going to talk about is a non-concurrence is not an invariably bad thing. if you're headed in the right area, you may draw a non-concurrence because people haven't been thinking about it enough to concur. So we're going to get there in a moment. So then let's look at the next iteration of what this board did. That was the 15th BCOEB meeting on December 2021. Now, I was on the committee by this time, as were many of the existing board members, and what we thought was really curious about that was we had been told that it took an act of Congress to name anything on the campus. And what we thought was curious about that was there were things on the campus that seemingly were not named with an act of Congress. So for example, UCLA had named the stadium after Jackie Robinson. But probably more surprisingly, they had named certain parts of the stadium after donors, financial donors to the baseball program. And then we learned that Brentwood was doing the same thing. And so we asked the question, can we get some legal guidance from the Office of General Counsel as to why this is happening? And we're not saying that it's a bad idea invariably. We may need to resort to donor naming in order to attract financial support or financial philanthropic support at the campus. Let's just get an answer as to what exactly is permitted. And so you'll see that what we got there in the 15 cycle was a bunch of concurs in principle. Again, not a concurrence per se. It's just the secretary and the executive secretariat, the staffing of the agency saying, we've got to look into this issue. And then finally, we get to the last recommendation, which is from June of 2022, the board met in its 17th session. And the board recommended that the secretary revert this campus, its north end, its residential end, not the hospital end, but that the campus revert its north end to its historic name, a name that goes back to the 1880s and its creation, and that's the Pacific Branch. Then we made a bunch of related recommendations about that's how the metro station ought to be named. We ought to do all these things because as we create a residential community, we don't want people tainted by the association of a hospital. We don't want people saying that they live at a hospital, right? None of us would want that if we were in that situation. And we've got this unique opportunity to revert to a historical tradition where for almost 100 years, this place was a veteran home, in addition to being the site of a VA hospital. Again, the secretary did not concur. But the reason he did not concur, and I'd encourage you to read all of this, is he just came firmly down on saying Congress has to do this. So I offer this to you as an example that I think we are absolutely focused on the right issues on naming. And I think we've developed the issue to the point where Congress now knows they need to intervene and help us with this, because I think we all know we're changing the identity of this campus. So take the time, go back and look at these recommendations and others, see how these issues have evolved. But I do think the experience of just, for example, this naming tells us a lot about how the committee can be effective. I'd say, vote your conscience, do the right thing. We don't have to achieve a 90% concurrence. I think Jeff would admit our committee's work is pretty novel. I think if we're pushing the agency and the leadership in the right direction, they'll appreciate it. And I know we've heard that from the secretary multiple times. So with that as a long-winded introduction, I'm going to pass the mic to the vice chair, General Sutton, to see if she has anything she'd like to add.
You know, I really don't have much to add. I'm just learning as I go. I know many of us are in that position. It's kind of like a fire hose, but I do see this as being such a novel and important and in some ways pioneering responsibility. And so much work has been done. As a resident of Southern California, I did part of my medical school rotation in emergency psychiatry years and years ago. And I remember coming over to the campus then and seen it in such a different state that it is now. So to have this privilege of working with each of you and listening to our veteran and family and advocate constituents, and together working with the department to collaborate, to push the envelope, to make progress, that's really work worth doing. And I just look forward to doing it with each of you. And that's really all I have to say at this point. I will say this, Mr. Chair, thank you so much for going around and including the other members, the current members. It's just amazing to learn of everyone's background that has brought us to this point. And, you know, who knows what we can do from here. But if we can dream it, we can do it, and we'll do it together. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
We've got the right people at the table, and I'd now like to introduce Dr. Steve Braverman, who's the interim VISN director. Steve, if you could, for those of us who are new to the board, tell the board how the VA system organizes its care in its hospitals.
Sure, thank you. So my name is Steve Braverman. For those of you who may not know me, I am also an Army veteran, retiree after 29 years as an Army physician, academics and operations. Came to the VA in 2016 afterwards as the director of the Hines VA in Chicago. Came here as the director of GLA in September of 2019. And then since May, moved to the VISN 22 network director role, and capably followed in my footsteps there by Rob as the interim GLA director, Rob Merchant. The VA at the top is the overall Department of Veterans Affairs. Under that are three administrations: the Veterans Health Administration, the Veterans Benefit Administration, and the National Cemetery Administration. In the VHA, which is all of the healthcare system and the facilities, that gets divided from the healthcare standpoint into 18 networks or regions. The Veterans Integrated Service Network is what VISN stands for. Even though we're number 22, there's actually numbers up to 23. There used to be 23, 5 got consolidated. That's why we're at 18. Our network is consisting of the 4 healthcare systems in Southern California. That would be this one in Los Angeles, the largest one, Long Beach, Loma Linda, and San Diego. The 3 in Arizona, which is Phoenix, Tucson, and Prescott, and the 1 in New Mexico, which is Albuquerque. So as the interim network director, I serve in that director staff role that supports and oversees those healthcare systems, of which, as I mentioned, GLA is the largest. So, and the one thing I will say for those of you who are here, I would say that when I got here in 2019, the relationship between GLA and the VCOEB was a bit contentious, to say the least. I think that has developed into a more cooperative and collaborative relationship over time, and I think we've made good progress together, and I think it's worth highlighting that. Yeah.
Good morning, Rob. Could you introduce yourself as well?
Sure, thank you. Good morning, everybody. My name is Rob Merchant, as Dr. Braverman said. I'm the interim medical center director here. And so on behalf of our more than 5,000 employees at VA Greater Los Angeles and the 90,000 veterans we serve, it's a real pleasure to welcome many of you back and to welcome others here for the first time. VA Greater Los Angeles is, of course, headquartered here at our historic heart in our home in West Los Angeles, but is actually only one of 11 sites of care where we deliver healthcare to veterans across our healthcare system. We have a 150-acre campus about 15 miles north of here in the San Fernando Valley. We have a 5-story ambulatory care center in downtown Los Angeles, located basically between City Hall and Union Station. And then those 2 clinics, those ambulatory care centers, are supported by outpatient clinics that span the 20,000 square miles of Southern California, the Central Coast and Central Valley that we serve, including a clinic in Bakersfield, in Kern County, and coming across to the Central Coast in San Luis Obispo County, in the city of San Luis Obispo, 2 clinics in Santa Barbara County, our newest clinic in the city of Ventura, and then here in Los Angeles County, We also have a clinic in the Antelope Valley, in the San Gabriel Valley, and in East Los Angeles. And that's how we expand our reach of services to veterans who are more remote from this facility. And look forward to talking with you more about that, perhaps on an information exchange. At some other time, we could focus on how we deliver care and what that care means to our operations here at West Los Angeles. But very glad to have you back here, and look forward to a good 2-day presentation. Thank you.
Now we're going to transition to Keith Harris. Keith, if you could introduce yourself and give us an update on your initiatives.
Good morning. I'm happy to. Great seeing you all. There's actually a number of the new team of people I've worked with in prior roles directly with, so this is really great to see everybody. I think this is a absolutely stacked BCOEB, and I'm really excited to see what it can accomplish. Fun little fact, you could have used my position as one of your examples here. I'm in a 3-year term SCS position. It was one of BCOEB's recommendations to the secretary to create such a position. So thank you all for that, by the way. But that was an example of a concur, where VA then took action. I really appreciated the background, so I actually want to return the favor and just do a real quick who I am for those of you who are new and unfamiliar with me. Again, I've been in this position a little over 2 years, so I'm on the final year of that role. Prior to that, I was the National Director of Operations for VA's homeless programs for 11 years. Prior to that, I ran the homeless programs at the Palo Alto VA. Spent my entire career in the VA, entire career focused on veterans homelessness. I'm currently, I just recently took a 50% detail to the White House All Inside initiative. So this is an initiative focused on unsheltered homelessness, not just veterans, in 6 communities around the country. The goal of really accelerating work on reducing unsheltered homelessness. One of the communities is Los Angeles. One of the communities is also the state of California. So there's still quite a bit of relevance here. I've talked with the prior board about this initiative. There are some opportunities. The single biggest push or thing that makes that initiative unique is the federal government's interest in helping communities identify where they need regulatory flexibility, other forms of waiver. That's the piece the federal government's bringing to it. So if you, as a board, run across something where you're bumping up against red tape, against regulation that is limiting what you or we can do, that is a potential vehicle for getting movement. It's outside of your normal chain and process, but it is an opportunity. So I wanted to bring people's attention to that. The content I was asked to cover today is an update on the work we've been doing related to veterans' disability benefits and the fact that they are counted as income when determining eligibility for housing and therefore disqualifying some of our more severely disabled veterans from the housing they need. Another fun fact I want to share, one of your new members is, to my knowledge, the very first person who ever brought this issue to the federal government's attention. And that's Dylan and Bastion. That was the first place where they realized that when you're dealing with severely disabled veterans with high service connection percentages, such as 100%, that is going to conflict with the income eligibility limits placed on the housing by funders. So when I first was pulled into this, I received this trove of information from HUD, background, dialogue, all that, and Dylan and Bastion were all over it. So I knew him through John Borsler. So he was one of the first people who taught me about this, and I give major kudos for the work you did in advocating for this. This has been the primary, frankly, the primary focus of my work in VA for the past year. And the updates I want to provide to you all are, there is a lot of activity continuing on this issue. The White House is involved. There was a joint briefing, including HUD, the Department of Treasury, and us at VA, facilitated by the White House to the House Veterans Affairs staffers in early January, early this month, and then a similar briefing to the Senate Veterans Affairs staffers. So there's a lot of discussion. Congress is very interested in this. We also, VA separately, had a briefing with Rep. Sherman, And this was one of 4 issues, along with naming rights, by the way. So there continues to be congressional interest in that, as you noted, Rob. And we, for those of you who haven't briefed Representative Sherman, boy, does he like details. He really dug into the weeds of this issue and covered a lot. And not long after that, I think many of you probably saw, and in fact, I think, Rob, you may have shared with this board, that Representatives Sherman and Liu put out a press release that included text of their letter to HUD Secretary Fudge on this issue and what they were proposing. One of my own kind of self-assigned roles in this issue is to keep this board technically educated on the issue. There were 2 small flaws in the letter they sent to HUD that I actually want to share with you. Several of you end up in conversations and meetings and other efforts independently on this. Jim, for instance, I'm thinking of Jim Zenner, who's working with the state, for instance, on this. So I wanted to call out 2 things that were in that letter that you may not have noticed. So the first of all, I'm extremely happy to have seen it. I thought they did a great job of articulating the problem and advocating for change. That said, one of the things their letter proposed was changing the definition of income, and they used the word only when qualifying a veteran for a HUD-VASH voucher. And this is problematic because the income limits on applying for a voucher set by the Public Housing Authority, they're set at 80% very median income for HUD-VASH. That is an astronomically high number when it comes to our population. Nearly every one of our veterans' income is under 80%. That is not the thing that is disqualifying veterans from housing. The thing that's disqualifying veterans from housing are the other income limits that are imposed by other funders, such as the tax credit funders, bonds, et cetera. VHHP, although that hasn't come up as an issue yet in the buildings that opened this past year. And the reason that's further problematic is the prior version of this board received a presentation from HUD on this issue in December in DC. And HUD has pretty heavily promoted the fact that they are pushing on all PHAs to set HUD-VASH AMI at 80%. And they're kind of pointing to that as their action that they're willing to take on this issue. So the letter unfortunately plays into their hands a little bit. It says we want to change this for qualifying for a HUD-VASH voucher. HUD's going to be able to say, we're already doing that. Neither of those things solves the problem. The other thing in that letter that I wanted to call out here is the letter specifically calls out low-income housing tax credits as kind of a source, the other source of the problem. And while it is true that the LIHTC program is a big piece of this, and it was actually the central focus of Bastion, because they use HUD's definition of income, which includes VA disability benefits. The problem is if you solve this problem for LIHTC, and you do not solve it for all the other funders that set income limits, then you do not solve the problem. The most restrictive income cap supersedes any others. And so the other thing we heard from HUD last month, and we've heard from HUD in these briefings, is that this is basically a LIHTC problem. LIHTC is overseen by the Department of Treasury, so the Department of Treasury needs to be the one to fix it. So unfortunately, by the letter focusing on LIHTC, HUD will again be able to say, that's not ours to solve, that's for Treasury to solve. To Treasury's credit, for anybody who doesn't know, they have already proposed a legislative change that would in fact alter their definition to exclude VA disability benefits. So we are getting movement on LIHTC. What we need to see is movement that'll ripple out to the other funders. We continue to work with Sherman's office in particular, providing technical assistance on this. They're aware of these issues and working on language that would resolve them. But I wanted you all to be aware of that particular piece. The other general update I wanted to give on this issue is a state of California specific update about Assembly Bill 1386, which we have talked about in prior meetings here. For anybody new, what's really unique and what presents a great opportunity here is what Assembly Bill 1386 does is for veteran housing units funded either by VHHP or by tax credits or private activity bonds, it basically creates a process whereby if a developer cannot fill a restricted unit at its starting point of 30% AMI, they can petition the state to increase that AMI up to 50% and in fact subsequently up to 60%. There's some weeds in there that I won't bother you with. But it's a very creative way to introduce flexibility into this process. The bill took effect January 1st. The state has not actually issued, to my knowledge, correct me if anybody knows otherwise, has not issued formal guidance on it yet in terms of how they are implementing it. They have not put out a form for developers to use, which is also part of their plan. But I met with them just a few days ago about this. I'm pretty optimistic about how they're approaching it. I made the case that it'd be great if the state avoided doing what bureaucracies normally do in situations like this, which is apply as many possible layers of red tape and rules as they could, and to make this as smooth as possible for developers to use to make commit to rapid responses to these petitions. And I got the impression that is their goal, to do just that. So I'm staying close to this. Part of what I want to do with it is as we learn more and want to apply it here, I want to find developers who want to petition for these so that we can work the kinks out, give feedback back to the state, and then disseminate that information elsewhere. So those are the two big updates I wanted to give to you on this issue. I don't know if there's time for questions, but happy to take them.
Absolutely. I would just add as kind of a background note that about a year ago, we were beginning to realize that some of these units we were building on campus weren't going to be income eligible for the veterans we wanted to place in. And it was a good issue that the West LA leadership flagged, talking with the principal developer. And then the senior VA leadership about a year ago said, well, we've got to get on top of this problem. And so it's a really good example of the novelty of this opportunity. Dylan, remarkably, it is incredible that you guys are sitting so close to each other, and the issue circles back years later. Dylan, when he was facing this problem, probably didn't have the level of congressional interest we're fortunate to have today. But that's because we're talking about building a community of 1,200 permanent supportive housing units. And so I just really want to underscore how unique our opportunity is, because we have been able to get a lot of technical advice from people like Keith, and the department, the agency has been able to engage Brad Sherman and Ted Lieu, and I think we're seeing real progress. And so it should serve as a real clear indicator of the novelty of the opportunity and also our chance to affect change. And I am going to claim credit for our committee and its recommendations that the VA signed as a homelessness expert in the form of Keith Harris. We didn't write the name Keith Harris in the form, but they knew that's who we were asking for. I'm sorry. Good morning, Jim.
Good morning, Jim Zenner. I don't know if you're aware of this, Keith, but there's HR 6179. In this, when we were discussing this as a board in DC, we talked about the need to exclude it from eligibility, but that income should be counted as income when calculating the payments. 6179, 15.1 and 2 talk about excluding it from eligibility. And then it talks about the rates. 2 talks about the rates not, being affected by getting housing through. But number 3 talks about the income, service-connected disability not being counted as income in the monthly calculation. And my big concern is it's not going to be budget neutral, and that's going to be something to really push back on. So I just wanted to flag that for the committee, or the board, sorry.
Jim would love to talk more about that. And just point of education on this, there are 2 different definitions. Annual income is what's used to determine housing eligibility. Adjusted income is what's used to determine tenant portion of rent. HUD, I think rightly, is concerned about budget impact if we take it out of, or take VA disability benefits out of both of those definitions. Part of what was really great to see about the messaging from Sherman and Lieu to HUD was calling out that distinction and saying we're only talking about excluding this from annual income. So that's good to hear. I'd love to know more about that, Bill.
Ms. Cohen?
I don't have a question for you, but I want to thank you for the work that we started a long time ago with me, maybe yelling at you in Zoom meetings. So I appreciate that. I just want to call out Representative Liu's office for attending these meetings, being here, and being a strong participant in this process. Still, even though Congressman Sherman is taking over as the representative of this area, we appreciate both Congress members. And Janet, I'm just going to embarrass you for a second and shout you out, because I do think it's important that we recognize that they send folks to these meetings. They sit here, they listen, they take our recommendations very seriously, and the partnership is really appreciated. I know Robert, or maybe it was you, Dr. Braverman, who mentioned the partnership and how much it's changed over the years. It's really important, I think, to just recognize that we have congressional representatives sitting here. We have the director of the county Department of Military and Veterans Affairs here, and we have Keith here representing Calvet. This is a partnership that we have not seen in the past, and it's really important, I think, that we continue to recognize it. I might continue to recognize it in every meeting, if you'll let me.
Corey, sorry, Jim Zenner?
Yeah, just to add on to that, where that could be problematic if the legislation goes as forward is our housing authorities. We're looking to house 70,000 individuals here in LA County, and if it affects the number of vouchers, you can see where that would cause some internal conflict with local PHAs and local government.
Nicole?
Hi. So I'm very excited that this is moving forward. I witnessed this firsthand in New York City, and I can talk more at a later time about what we did there. But on what Jim mentioned around the income is important, and I'll just add this to the conversation, is because tenants can't pay more than 30% of their income in rent, I'm not worried about, and I don't imagine others would be worried about this affecting the veterans too much once they moved in, it being burdensome. But if we exclude this as income, then more of the voucher is going towards these buildings, and there's less vouchers that can go out to other veterans in need. So I would just, I guess, second what Jim was saying, add that color to it. And then I have a question in terms of all this great work that's happening now in DC. On the ground, are we talking about income with the tax credit projects? So that's one way to work, I won't say around it, but around the issue in real time.
We are. A couple of the problems with income averaging. One is that it has to be committed to at the point they're seeking financing. So decisions were made on every building we're talking about right now a couple of years ago, and they were not made with this in mind. So there's a whole bunch of 30% units that really are stuck that way. So it's one of the tools for longer term, and we have had some discussions with developers about the possibility of introducing that into their plans for buildings they're seeking financing for now, which would mean we'd get some relief in a couple more years. There's weedier problems I've talked to the developers about. There, it actually applies to the average of the caps on the units, not to the income of the veterans in them, which means you don't sort of get credit for the averaging when you bring in a zero income veteran. So because of that, you're basically averaging 30s, 40s, and 50s, and 60s. And it has to average out to 40%. And in the end, it doesn't help our math as much as it seems like it should. But we are discussing it. And then while I've got the mic, I think one of Dylan's secret skills might be congressional advocacy, because you'd be amazed at the number of Congress people he had writing in Treasury on his behalf. They actually did have some great congressional support at the time. It wasn't enough to make any changes whatsoever on the part of Treasury or HUD. But the advocacy was there. I think we've got real traction now that I think Dylan wishes he could have had at the time. But I did want to call that out.
I'd like to think that we'll fight for Dylan to have a seat at the signing table. All right. So that's it for this morning's session. It's great. As you can tell, what's great about this opportunity is it's a conversation. I did want to tell everyone, we have note takers who take down everything that's said by every person. And so it is important before you begin speaking just to say, Rob Beckman, Jim Bennett, because we try to create a very comprehensive written record. So, all right, I'm going to give Steve Braverman the last one.
That's always scary, but thank you. So just two quick points to the AMI discussion, and why it matters here. And the reason why it matters in some cases in this neighborhood, if you will, versus other places, is that many of those seeking housing in this, master plan housing group community are veterans who have high disability ratings and need to be, co-located is probably a bad word, but somewhere close to the medical facilities. And that drives an increased interest in people who have high disability ratings to stay here versus other parts of town. And it's really that population that's in the 90 to 100% disability, especially those who are over 62 and eligible for Social Security, that when you add that disability with the Social Security, it throws them up over the 60% range. It's still under 80 in most cases, but it throws them under the 60. So for the project-based housing that we use for the EULs that we're building in order to be close to the hospital healthcare system, they're the ones most affected. And that's why that's important here. And then the other piece to identify is that I don't have numbers per se, but the PACT Act, which is largely being touted to try to bring veterans into the system because of eligibility associated with toxic exposure, is also increasing disability claims for existing veterans, which will further increase their disability evaluation and take their AMIs again higher than the 30, 40, 50 it may be now, to over that 60%. So that's why this is especially important here in West LA, even more so than it may be in other places, because the truth is there are enough units for people who are under 60%, but not enough units here for people who get disqualified. Over.
All right, so our next presentation will be from the Office of General Counsel. Let's take 5 minutes, stretch our legs, and then we'll go back to 5:50. All right, so our next presentation will be on the legislative history of this campus, and we're very lucky to have two talented lawyers from the DC headquarters, Robert Davenport and Kristen Breakfast. Good morning.
Good morning, everyone. Chairman Beglin, thank you for that introduction. Can you hear me? Okay. When you were talking about the naming rights and mentioned the Office of General Counsel, I think you were using that as an example of a success, maybe. Hopefully that our presentation today will also result in some sort of successes with regards to GCWB as we move down the line and begin to really understand some of the legislative authorities in which we're operating. As Chairman Beglin mentioned, I'm Robert Davenport. I'm the Chief Counsel for the Office of General Counsel Real Property Law Group. Our primary responsibility in the Real Property Law Group is everything real property and land use related to the Department of Veterans Affairs. That would be environmental issues, leasing, real estate, and one of the primary projects that falls within that bucket is the West LA project here in Los Angeles. With me today, I have Ms. Kristen Groteclaus, who's one of my colleagues in the Office of General Counsel, and she will be doing the bulk of the presentation. What I would just like to start with is an introduction to the fact that the history of the West LA campus is a long, sordid history that dates back to 1887. You've asked for a laydown of legislative authorities related to the campus. We're not going to go back to 1887, but we are going to provide a general overview that I think will help everyone in this room do their jobs in a more effective manner with regard to this Federal Advisory Commission. One primary point when it comes to legislative authorities is the fact that from a federal agency standpoint, we can only do those things that are specifically authorized by Congress. there are a lot of things, a lot of authorities related to the West LA property that could come into play as part of this development. But the primary legislative authority is really the West LA Leasing Act. We're going to spend the bulk of our time on that. But also make very clear as well that the VA is not authorized in any way to use our build permanent supportive housing. That is typically done through our enhanced use leasing program and partnerships with local and other development entities. So Ms. Grotecloss is going to run through all of that, and we'll be standing by for questions after our presentation. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I will try to give a comprehensive overview without boring you with too much legalese. Apologies in advance, and feel free to interrupt with any questions you have, and we'll also have time at the end. As Robert mentioned, I think it's really important to begin with just agency to you. So generally that takes the form of large agency-wide authorities, but sometimes that can also be more restrictive or limited, as is the case with West LA. So for the West LA campus, it's unique in many regards, not least of which is the West LA Leasing Act. And the West LA Leasing Act is more restrictive than VA's general land use authorities. So basically what that means is VA can only enter into a very limited set of land use agreements on the West LA campus. You can go to the next slide. And the bulk of those land use agreements fall into four main categories. There's enhanced use leases, which are commonly referred to as EULs. Those are authorized under Section 2B1 of the West LA Leasing Act. And under EULs, VA leases underutilized property to third parties who in turn finance, develop, and operate supportive housing on the property for the lease term. That's the only vehicle by which we can develop and operate permanent supportive housing on the West LA campus. The second category is service leases. That's authorized under Section 2B2 of the West LA Leasing Act, and those are leases to third parties to provide enumerated services that are enumerated in the West LA Leasing Act that principally benefit veterans and their families. The third category is easements. Easements are authorized under Section 2E of the West LA Leasing Act, and easements may be granted to public transportation authorities, state, county, or city entities, and public utility companies. And for those of you that might not be familiar with the concept of an easement, it's basically a non-possessory land use right to access someone else's property for a specific purpose. So you can think of, a sidewalk that the city installs on your property, or utility lines, those types of things. And then the fourth category is revocable licenses. Revocable licenses are authorized under a catch-all term in the Leasing Act, Section 2K. And those are when licenses are granted to third parties and they are a revocable, non-recordable right to use VA space or land for a specific purpose. On the West LA campus, the primary purpose must be for the veteran-focused use of the campus. Go to the next slide. And before we get into kind of the nitty-gritty of the legislative history and our current land use authorities, it is helpful to provide a little background to kind of fit these authorities within the larger context of the campus. So unfortunately, Robert, we are going to go back to 1887. The West LA campus was originally donated to the government to serve as a branch of the National Home for Disabled Volunteer Soldiers. In 1887, Congress authorized the establishment of a Pacific branch of the National Home System to be determined property west of the Rocky Mountains. In 1888, Arcadia Bandini de Baker and Senator John P. Jones deeded 300 acres of land to the federal government in what is now West LA and where we're now seated to serve as a Pacific branch of the National Home System. In 1930, Congress merged the National Home System with the Veterans Bureau and the Bureau of Pensions to establish a new Veterans Administration. And that was really the precursor to the modern VA we have today. And then in 1958, Congress enacted legislation that abolished the National Home System, repealed the various acts of Congress that had established the National Home branches, and authorized the VA administrator to provide hospital and domiciliary facilities on any property then owned by the United States. After 1958, the focus of the West LA property and the Veterans Administration as a whole shifted to the provision of healthcare benefits and cemetery services to veterans rather than the construction and management of permanent supportive housing. So that is kind of like a really important shift in kind of the purpose of the VA and the focus of the West LA campus. Go to the next slide. That brings us to some of the specific authorities. The starting point would be 1986. In 1986, the VA administrator notified Congress of his intent to dispose of approximately 109 acres of unimproved land on the West LA campus and 46 acres of unimproved land at another LA area facility, the Sepulveda Medical Center. In direct response to that, the Cranston Amendment was added to the Veterans Benefits Improvement and Healthcare Authorization Act of 1986. And what that did was specifically prohibit the VA administrator from taking any action prior to January 1st, 1988 to dispose of the land described in his notice to Congress. Then following that up in 1988, there was the Veterans Benefits and Services Act, and that enacted a special rule repealing the short-term prohibition provided by the Cranston Amendment and replaced it with a permanent prohibition on disposal of any of the property described in the VA administrator's 1986 notice to Congress. And then the next important piece of legislation to flag is in 1992, the Homeless Veterans Comprehensive Service Programs Act of 1992. In that, Congress granted VA the limited authority to lease land or buildings on the West LA campus to representatives of the homeless to provide services to homeless veterans and the families of such veterans. More specifically, that authorized leases for a term of 3+ years to a state or local government agency or private nonprofit organization, which provides services to the homeless to use the property only as a location for the provision of services to homeless veterans and their families. And then in 2007, we have the Feinstein Amendment to the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2008. And in that, Congress reiterated and expanded on the previously enacted prohibitions on disposition of the West LA campus by specifically prohibiting VA from taking any action to exchange, trade, auction, transfer, or otherwise dispose of or reduce the acreage of the West LA campus, except to a representative of the homeless as provided in the 1992 legislation. So unlike the 1986 Cranston Amendment and the 1988 special rule, both of which only focus on the acreage subject to the VA administrator's 1986 notice to Congress, the Feinstein Amendment strictly prohibited disposition of any building or land within the entirety of the 388-acre West LA campus. And what's important to note is this also was a prohibition on leasing on the campus, except as authorized in 1992. Go next. I'm also going to take a step back and walk through the EUL authority as it applies to the VA. So the EUL authority has had many iterations over the years. I'm only going to highlight the most relevant to our purposes. It was originally authorized in 1991 under the Veterans Benefits Programs Improvement Act of 1991. Congress authorized VA to provide long-term leases to third-party developers to adapt and reuse underutilized buildings or land through a then new type of land use agreement known as an EUL. Because of the 1988 special rule, however, the new EUL authority was not applicable to the areas of the West LA campus and the Sepulveda Medical Center described in the 1986 notice to Congress. As originally enacted, VA's EUL authority was quite broad. It allowed for any use of VA property that was not inconsistent with VA's mission. In 2012, the EUL authority was amended by the Honoring America's Veterans and Caring for Camp Lejeune Families Act of 2012. In that, Congress narrowed VA's EUL authority, authorizing VA to enter into EULs only for the provision of supportive housing. And then again, in 2022, there is an amendment via the PACT Act, the Sergeant First Class Keith Robinson Honoring Our Promise to Address Comprehensive Toxics Act of 2022. In that, Congress broadened VA's EUL authority, authorizing EULs that are not inconsistent with the mission of VA and that will enhance the use of the leased property by directly or indirectly benefiting veterans or will provide supportive housing. The PACT Act also increased the term limit for EULs from 75 to 99 years. And then also in the PACT Act, Congress allocated $922 million to enter into enhanced use leases. And $381 million of that is allocated specifically for entering into enhanced use leases on the West LA campus. The broadened PACT Act authority, however, does not apply to the West LA campus because of the West LA Leasing Act, which we'll get into a little bit more on the next slide. So I recommend all of you take the time to read the West LA Leasing Act, as it really lays out a lot of the parameters in which we are limited to operate on the West LA campus and really shapes a lot of our development decisions. The Enhanced Use Lease Authority, as I mentioned previously, is Section 2B1 of the West LA Leasing Act. And it authorizes enhanced use leases for purposes of providing supportive housing that principally benefits veterans and their families. So as you can see, that's a little bit narrower than the PACT Act. And because it's more specific, it limits the authority that would have been granted under the PACT Act that we have elsewhere at the VA. Then also we have our Service Lease Authority, which is authorized under Section 2B2 of the Leasing Act. And that authorizes any lease of real property for a term not to exceed 50 years to a third party to provide services that principally benefit veterans and their families, and that are limited to one or more of the following purposes: the promotion of health and wellness, including nutrition and spiritual wellness, education, vocational training, skills building, or other training related to employment, peer activities, socialization, or physical recreation, assistance with legal issues and federal benefits, volunteerism, family support services, including childcare, transportation, services in support of one or more of the purposes specified in subparagraphs A through H. And then the Leasing Act also specifically authorizes a lease to UCLA. That's authorized under Section 2B3 of the Leasing Act. And that's a lease of real property not to exceed 10 years. And the lease must be consistent with the master plan. And the provision of services to veterans is the predominant focus of the activities during the lease, and that the regions expressly agree to provide during the term of the lease, and to an extent and in a manner that the Secretary considers appropriate, additional services and support that principally benefits veterans and their families, and may consist of activities relating to medical clinics, therapeutic, dietary, rehabilitative, legal, mental, spiritual, etc. So that's long. We don't have to read all of it, but we can move on now. You get the gist of it. It's another service lease authority. Go to the next slide. The Leasing Act also authorizes easements under Section 2E, and it authorizes easements to any local or regional public transportation authority to access, construct, use, operate, maintain, repair, or reconstruct public mass transit facilities, including fixed guideway facilities and transportation centers. That's the authority under which we entered into the Purple Line easement. And then also to the state of California, County of Los Angeles, City of Los Angeles, or any agency or political subdivision thereof, or to any public utility company for the purpose of providing such utilities. And then also the Leasing Act importantly defines principally benefits veterans and their families as that term is used in the Act. And it defines principally benefit veterans and their families with respect to services provided by a person or entity under a lease of property or land sharing agreement as meaning services provided exclusively to veterans and their families, or that are designed for the particular needs of veterans and their families, as opposed to the general public, and any benefit of those services to the general public is distinct from the intended benefit to veterans and their families. It also excludes services in which the only benefit to veterans and their families is the generation of revenue for the Department of Veterans Affairs. And a few other sections worth flagging, though Rob mentioned some of these briefly earlier. Section 2I authorizes the creation of a new Federal Advisory Committee, the VCOEB. And then Section 2J also implements some reporting requirements. It requires the VA to submit annual congressional reports evaluating all leases and land sharing agreements on the campus. And it also requires the IG to report on leases, land use, and draft master plan implementation 2 and 5 years after enactment of the West LA Leasing Act, and thereafter as determined necessary. So basically, the Leasing Act was entered into in 2016. The Act required IG audits in 2018 and 2021, And whether there will be additional audits is at the discretion of the Inspector General. Go to the next slide. Since 2016, there have been 2 amendments to the West LA Leasing Act. In 2018, the Department of Veterans Affairs Expiring Authorities Act of 2018 modified Section 2H of the Leasing Act regarding VA's ability to enter into leases or land sharing agreements after an adverse IG finding. The original language was overly broad and prevented VA from entering into any land use agreements after an IG finding. The amended language limited VA's ability to renew or enter into new land use agreements that are subject to an IG finding. So it's a little complicated to understand, but I think it really illustrates what it does by showing the amendment in red here. So you can see, as originally drafted, if there was an adverse IG finding on any land use agreement on the campus, we couldn't enter into any new land use agreements. After the amendment, we couldn't enter into new or renew land use agreements that were subject to that IG finding, if that makes sense. Go on to the next slide. And then in 2021, there was another amendment, the West LA Campus Improvement Act of 2021, and that grants VA greater flexibility in the use of land use revenues on the West LA campus. Any land use revenues received by the Secretary shall be credited to the applicable Department Medical Facilities account or minor construction accounts and shall be available without fiscal year limitation and without further appropriation exclusively for any of the following purposes: supporting construction, maintenance, and services at the campus relating to temporary or permanent housing for homeless or at-risk veterans and their families, renovating and maintaining the land and facilities at the campus, carrying out minor construction projects at the campus, and carrying out community operations at the campus that support the development of emergency shelter or supportive housing for homeless or at-risk veterans and their families. And under the original West LA Leasing Act, land use revenues could only be used for renovating and maintaining the land and facilities of the campus. The West LA Campus Improvement Act also defines land use revenue as any funds received by the Secretary under a lease described in Section 2B of the Leasing Act, and also any funds received as proceeds from any assets seized or forfeited and any restitution paid in connection with any third-party land use at the campus. It also extends the term of EULs on the West LA campus to be consistent with the PACT Act, so from 75 to 99 years. One thing that's worth flagging is that the definition of land use revenue does not include easement consideration. And generally, that wouldn't be an issue except for that purple line easement, where I believe the VA received $26.8 million in consideration that we had to remit to Treasury rather than using on the campus. I think that's the gist of the slides I prepared, but we're happy to take any questions or comments.
I'll go first as the lawyer, one of the lawyers in the room, Rob Begland. And I'll offer a comment. I think this is the first time we've ever gotten a comprehensive history of the legislation, so I'm truly grateful.
Good.
I think we've all tended to look back to the 2016 Leasing Act as the beginning, and you've educated us that a lot of these issues have really been percolating for a long time. So I really just want to emphasize a couple points I took from the presentation. Probably the most important is that as early as 1992, this campus was recognized as a resource for addressing homelessness. We all tend to think about homelessness as a problem that's only gotten public attention in the last 20 years, but Congress actually and the VA were thinking, no, as early as 1992, consistent with the notion this was a veteran's home, that we ought to be willing to not only lease, but potentially even sell the land to homeless agencies or actors to address homelessness, which I think is an extraordinary sign. So I just think we all ought to think historically about the fact that this is a long tradition. The other thing is, from the presentation I think is so valuable, is there is this legislation early on about preventing the agency from disposing of this land through private sale. We also, again, tend to think about the Valentini versus Shinseki lawsuit and the concerns about commercialization of this campus as kind of the genesis of where we are and the genesis of the master plan, when in fact, that's not the beginning. In other words, even back in the 1990s, people like Dianne Feinstein were worried about the potential for commercialization because of the commercial pressures in West LA. And so they led a charge to set aside this land and preserve it as veteran. So I think it's a great presentation. We've never before gotten it because I think it reminds us that 2015 and the lawsuit isn't the starting point of all this. A lot of these factors go back literally decades. Jim Zenner?
Yeah, Jim Zenner. Yeah, just great presentation. Thank you. Just reflecting on all the thanks that we owe Senator Feinstein for her stewardness of this property. So with the ULI report, wondering, is there any kind of legal issues in implementing the ULI findings based on?
Yes.
I'd love to hear about that.
You know, we haven't fully fleshed out all of their recommendations and the extent to which they're legal. There's definitely a lot of legal interpretation that is required. But for example, things like a hotel, I think all of us can read the legislation and say that likely does not fit within the parameters of a service lease that provides services that principally benefit veterans and their families. Certainly can continue that discussion, but it's a long one.
While we wait for someone else to come up with a question, I do want to spin the idea of that hotel because I don't want us to let go of it just yet. The creation of a veteran-run hotel could be of a vocational training opportunity. So, you know, LA is a tourism economy. There's lots of hotels in the city, the county. And we might want to think about the creation of a veteran-run hotel, which was a totally new suggestion from the Urban Land Institute. I don't think it had ever come up before, as an opportunity to train veterans in hotel work. Be the first to agree with you. It's not conventional. It doesn't fit within the service lease definition real obviously, but we might be able to argue for it under the vocational training.
I think there's a potential where there could be a path towards yes, but I think that it would be very difficult. As we've seen, particularly with the IG's interpretation of many of our authorities. For example, there's a parking lot lease that provides job training to veterans and also the operation of a parking lot, which we view as falling within the transportation category of the enumerated categories. And the IG said, no, that doesn't fall within the scope of the West LA Leasing Act, because the fundamental purpose of this lease is to provide parking for the local businesses, not to provide services for veterans, even though it is providing job training for the veterans. So I think we'd fall into that same issue with a hotel. But, you know, we're certainly open to hearing creative arguments and trying to find ways to develop the campus in the best possible way to serve veterans and their families.
Stephanie Coe, please.
Jim, did you have a follow-up though from that? No? Okay. I wanted to sort of piggyback on what Jim and Rob were talking about around the ULA report. I think what we haven't had and what might be helpful, whether it's at a board meeting or a follow-up in between board meetings, because there are not that many in the year, is to really understand from the VA perspective and have a legal analysis on what the intent was for the town center property and sort of where we started many, many years ago and where we are now, and what is able to be placed there based on what was envisioned in discussions with the community and in discussions with the veteran community during the first set of town halls that we had on the master plan in general. I don't think that, I mean, I think some of us feel like we know the answer, but I'd really like to understand sort of a deeper dive on that question throughout history. The question of, can we put a hotel here? I get that's one part of it, but I think we really need to dive deep into this issue and understand the legal analysis behind it and where the VA sits, so that then we know sort of where we can move forward from here as a board in making future recommendations. Is that something that maybe we could think about?
Absolutely. And I think we'll have to both do an information exchange around the issue and probably also have a focus board meeting. You might even consider a one-day board meeting just on that topic because it's so important. Sarah Hunter.
Oh, just to provide a comment, a creative, discussion around the hotel. I personally think that's a great idea, given the context that this VA serves a very broad geography with the primary medical center being here. If any of you or your family members have experienced a serious health condition, having a hotel nearby for before or after that procedure and for your caregivers, that could be a really great service. I know UCLA, for example, has sort of a affordable hotel located just a block away from their medical center that provides that support to patients and their families. So something similar like that here on this campus could be a really great asset. And I see that as a service for sure.
Jim Zinner.
Yeah, I just, going back to the hotel, I remember talking about that in 2015 as a community. So that's something we've been talking about for a long time. I think in the most recent USC study, we found they surveyed close to about 3,200 veterans, and they found that 19% of veterans reported being housing unstable in their transition out of the military. And I think a hotel could be a great intermediary to support people transitioning out of the military into Southern California to make sure that they have a place to go. Also, I'm really proud of the conversations we had as a board leading up to the finish of last year around looking at student housing on the campus. I think we got to look outside of course, we have to take care of our veterans that have the most need, but we got to turn the faucet off here in LA and across the country. And I think the hotel is a great piece to part to do that.
Keith Boylan.
Keith Boylan. In San Francisco, they have the Marine Corps Memorial Hotel, which is a 501c3. It's operated since I think the 40s, right around the Union Square area, and it's fabulous. It's a really historic building as well, but it's a fabulous location and opportunity. And it serves any active or any of those who have served honorably have the opportunity to stay at that hotel with their families. And back to Sarah's point, in terms of the proximity to the VA Medical Center, that's also a really important feature too. So there are examples that currently exist of how this might be done in a way that would be appropriate for the campus.
Let me just be very clear on the hotel proposal and the nature of the presentation today. There's no dispute here that hotel may be a attractive amenity as it relates to the campus. But I think that one thing that we want to make sure that everyone takes away with regards to this presentation is that Congress, in crafting the West LA Leasing Act, was very specific about the types of activities that are permissible on the campus. EUL authority for supportive housing, but then with regard to service leases, a very clearly enumerated list of activities that could take place. Chairman Beglin, I appreciate your thoughts with regard to certain activities, trying to, figure out a way that they can fit within one of those categories. But I think that one other thing that we need to be very clear about, and Kristen did mention this in the presentation, is a question of principally benefiting veterans and their families and how that fits within that enumerated category of uses. So what you're hearing from us is that, from a, not to say that the hotel may not be an attractive amenity as it relates to the campus, but Congress was very clear as far as the types of activities that can be performed on this campus. And, hotels would, arguably fall squarely outside of those enumerated categories. Okay.
Let me just follow up real quick, Chairman Prerogative. One thing we could do with the hotel concept is make it only eligible for veterans to stay there. So not only would we be framing it as a vocational training opportunity for veterans who are living on campus, but we'd be limiting the audience to veterans and their families. I'd be happy to sit on the floor of Congress and argue that that meets the test of principally benefiting veterans. And I think you would be too. So I just think when people hear the word hotel, I think they reflexively say, oh, that seems awfully commercial. But then I think you have to add, well, maybe it's a hotel that serves just veterans. Or maybe it's a hotel that serves just veterans seeking medical care, long-term medical care at the VA hospital. So I'm convinced we've got enough smart people at the table. We'll figure out a way to finagle the test. Dr. Wellish.
Mark Wellish. The elephant that's still in the room about the West LA VA leasing act is the Brentwood School, or not easement, the Brentwood School arrangement. We have, it's a major issue for veterans who want to use this campus and find that that thing exists. And I don't know why it's so untouchable. Why is that?
Well, Dr. Wellish, what I will say is that I think it's very clear that there has been a pretty long record of dispute between the VA's position towards the Brentwood School Place and the OIG. Our record from a VA standpoint and the Office of General Counsel is that that is a permissible use of the property under the West LA Leasing Act for a variety of reasons, and don't want to get too deeply into that. That's not the primary focus of this conversation, but that is the VA's position with regards to Brentwood Schools.
They're in litigation, so they can't go into much discussion. But we'll have a separate information exchange probably on this exact issue. All right, so we're a little bit over time, but I want to respect both Dave's question and John Sharon's. So briefly, gentlemen.
Thank you. Even though this is the first time I'm hearing about the hotel issue, I agree with you that we could treat this, those of us that have been in the military know what military building is. And having that for use for just veterans, their families, you know, it respects for tourism. And I also would say that it does fall within the category of supportive housing in the sense that it's temporary in that aspect. So I think there are some ways that it could be included as part of that process, as long as it's utilized specifically for veterans and their families, especially folks that are being treated here at the West LA VA for a variety of reasons.
All right, Dr. Sharon.
Yeah, not to beat the hotel, you know, too much more, but I just want to be clear. I mean, there was a period of at least a year where a number of us were engaging with vets for multiple years to talk about how they wanted to, you know, ideally use this campus for their benefit. The concept of a hotel came up for a lot of the reasons that we're talking about. Being an opportunity for vets who couldn't afford to stay in a hotel here, for veteran families, for people who didn't qualify for what's the name of the place? Patriot House, and there's another one next to it, Patriot House. I haven't been in this game for a while, guys. Anyway, what I think what's happening here is this is a really important opportunity for this entire country to look at how we get government to consider uses of government assets in an entrepreneurial way for the benefit of the people that it's intended. That's the confluence that we're dealing with here, and it's a hot topic. It presses council way over the top. It's been there for a long, long time, but I think we have to use this opportunity to really, really push the envelope on what's possible and recognize that our customer will benefit the more creative we are, the more courageous we are in moving the ball forward in public-private partnership.
All right, thank you very much for the presentation. We're going to take a quick 5-minute break. Everyone can get up and walk around, but they promise me they're back in 5 minutes.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to hear about the construction of the new hospital. Good morning, Mr. Davidson.
Good morning, sir. Hey, great morning, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I'm Ross Davidson. I'm the Associate Executive Director for Facility Planning in the Office of Construction and Facilities Management. Also a 25-year Army veteran. A lot of my career in the Army was as in project execution. So recapitalizing a lot of healthcare facilities for the Army and DoD. What do you need? Oh, sorry. Okay, I'll move around. Don't worry. Don't worry. I don't sit still. That's why I can't be behind the little podium there, but I'll make sure that you guys can see the screen. My background is primarily in project execution, recapping the DoD's medical facilities. First design build hospital on the DoD side down in Fort Benning, Georgia, a number of years ago. And so as penance, my title now is facility planning. I used to badmouth all of the planners when I would actually work on project execution in the field. And so now I'm paying penance and being able to hopefully provide a better solution for project execution. And what I want to be first and foremost is say thank you all for a lot of your military service, but more importantly, thank you all for your participation in the VCOED and what you're doing. This is really noble work, and I'm really humbled to be here today to present to you a portion of, really what's going on the campus. And so, as was mentioned earlier, this should really be a conversation. So please don't wait till the end to ask questions. I have a ton of slides, but really interrupt as we go along, and I think that will actually enhance the discussion as this moves forward, and hopefully improve your understanding of what we're trying to do here at the campus. Next slide. Just a quick little agenda, what we're going to kind of cover. I was asked to really hit the highlights on what the project is and really the planning associated with what got us to doing the critical care center. Next slide. This has already been discussed. GLA's dual mission. One is looking at really the greater healthcare needs of veterans in the greater Los Angeles area. And then, tied to that, improving healthcare access and outcomes, in particular for the chronically homeless and severely disabled. Next slide. So we'll just start off really quickly with just sort of the project highlights. The critical care center is a 450,000 square foot addition to the existing facility. This existing building 500 will actually stay in place for the foreseeable future, but a lot of the inpatient services are going to be coming out and going into this new facility. There will be a connection to building 500, and then as we look at the construction side of it, we're still early in the process, but once we get to a project award, we're looking at a 47-month period of construction. This is in our FY25 budget, so looking at an award in 25 with a first patient date in that new facility in the 2030 timeframe. In addition to that, we're also looking at a central utility plant that also helps cover the South Campus. That will also be part of that contracting mechanism, but the delivery of that will be a little bit quicker, and it will actually support the existing facility as well. And so that should come online in about the 2028 timeframe. Next slide. And then to be able to do this, we actually have a series of partners. So at this point, we're working with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. They are our construction agent, design and construction agent. As I mentioned earlier, we are putting this in our FY25 budget. And after we do that, we'll look at about a 9-month solicitation for the construction award, and then period of performance with that first patient day, once again, being in the early 2030 timeframe. After construction is complete, there will be an activations
Code red, all clear. Code red, all clear.
Didn't know there was a code red.
Code red, all clear. Code red, all clear.
So as part of that 2030 date, there will be a initial outfitting and transition period. So once construction is complete, there will be activities to actually get into that new facility. Excellent. So how did we get here? So this is this has been going on quite a while. I'm not going to take us all the way back to 1887, but I will take us back quite a ways into the 70s to kind of talk through one, how we got into this facility, and then how we're going forward into the future. So the original prospectus for a facility, an inpatient requirement, was really identified back in 2010. And as part of that, really what's kind of the takeaway on this is the red underlined number of beds identified in each of these little time blocks. And you can see how it's fluctuating throughout this relatively short period of time of 8 years. As we get to the end of that, though, that's when we start to really get a little bit more clarity on moving forward. And there's been a couple key moments in analysis and in identifying requirements moving forward that I think helps secure a little bit of that volatility so that we don't have as much volatility moving forward. Next slide. Additionally, part of the background associated with this project in particular is the seismic impacts of the area. I will take us back to 1971 and the earthquake in the area. The picture on the left is the VA campus, a catastrophic event where we lost 47 lives. Great seeing Jeff here today. And one of the outcomes associated with that horrific event was the establishment of the VA's Structural Advisory Committee. And so that's been going on annually as well, providing updates and recommendations to the Secretary on how we improve seismic evaluation for our facilities moving forward. And so as part of that outcome from the 71 earthquake, we were in the facility that we're in today. That was the initial driver on a facility replacement. And this facility, built in 1977, was one of the largest, most modern VA facilities west of the Mississippi, at about 1 million square feet. It was great for the time, but seismic engineering continues to advance, and so the earthquakes in Loma Linda and Northridge in 89 and 94 showed us that we still have a ways to go. And so this became part of the additional evaluation in criteria development as we look at high risk and extreme high risk characterization of our facilities. And as we looked at Building 500 in particular, Building 500 became one of those facilities that was identified in the extreme high risk category. And so what do we do here to be able to move that forward? Next slide. That is not West LA. That is actually San Diego. So a very similar building typology was built around the same time frame. And this facility down in San Diego was actually retrofitted with an exoskeleton back in 2007, award-winning solution to actually preserve that building one and be able to get that seismically compliant for the healthcare delivery needs. So really removing that from the extreme high risk list. Unfortunately, that solution does not work here in West LA. The level of seismic activity is a little bit higher, greater, the risk is a little bit greater. So really a replacement is really our only opportunity to pull those activities out of the facility in order to accommodate or reduce that extreme high risk requirement. Next slide. And so that brings me to, okay, so big deal, Ross. Why are you here to talk about this when we're talking about the entire campus? This is part of the overall look and feel of the West LA master plan. And in particular, we're down on the South Campus and really that healthcare district as part of that. And this is really the start of a series of activities that are going to proceed as we move forward to be able to satisfy the healthcare master plan moving forward. Next slide. And so now we'll talk a little bit about, okay, what about the planning pieces? Why does this matter? Well, there's three basic components that kind of drive us towards this. It's the strategy, it's the forecasting, and then the analysis of that information to be able to move these pieces forward. So from that, the strategy piece, what are the main drivers that we need to do for healthcare delivery within the West LA campus? The number of veterans being served, the services that are being provided, how do we satisfy that demand? We then couple that with the forecasting. So looking at forecasting models such as the Millman model on long-term 10 to 20 year requirements moving forward on being able to provide that healthcare delivery requirement. And then doing the analytics, what is the long-term driver for being able to sustain those levels of service delivery within the market. Excellent. And so this is kind of a precursor of what we're going to actually get into some of the analytics associated with this, but ultimately we're getting to 160 beds as the CCC's end state for an inpatient capability. And I'll break those down in a future slide as well. That's a little bit of a reduction from our current bed count. And we'll see part of that is being driven from a reduction in the overall veteran population within the GLA. Next slide. So as we start looking at the analysis, we're looking at, where are the veterans located, and in particular, how are they affected by a 30-minute and 60-minute drive times? 30-minute really driven from a primary care perspective, and 60-minute more on our secondary and tertiary care, inpatient side of the house. Next slide. And here's that projection model. So as we start looking forward into the future, what does the projection model look like for our veteran population? The overall veteran population is decreasing, but we're not seeing a reduction. We are not forecasting a reduction in the number of projected enrollees to the healthcare system. And so this is where, being able to do the analytics on kind of the status quo for our bed number, even though we have a declining market, helps satisfy a effort on moving forward with the number of beds that we have. This does not include Long Beach. So the little breakout chart to the lower right actually shows Long Beach is actually a different market, and those beds are being counted separately within the area. Next slide. Here's just a breakout of the demographics within that area. So just kind of showing the projection of the overall veterans. The one increase that we are actually seeing is the increase in the number of female veterans. And then on the far right side, the increase in the number of priority one veterans moving forward. Next slide. And so as we start looking at primary service areas, we also look at the opportunities within the civilian healthcare market on using analytics such as the Dartmouth Atlas. And this is basically identifying how we're generating service delivery plans within the area. As part of that, that helps identify our hospital service areas as we move forward. Let's actually move on to the next slide. The next couple slides will actually help formulate. These maps are really sort of the background. So here we're showing really the density within the market, the population density. So the darker the color, the higher the density of the veteran population within that. So very similar migration patterns from a healthcare delivery standpoint on the previous model, where we're looking at how does the location correspond to where they would actually receive primary care and then their secondary and tertiary care. And then on the little breakout chart, once again, just showing the overall veteran population that is being supported. The first part of that, where you're seeing a lot of the numbers, those are the primary care. So that first entry point for access, those 30-minute drive times and the distribution within the area to be able to support that. Whereas the secondary 60-minute drive times, that's not really that secondary tertiary care support. And that is the collection point, so to speak, of those other entities. Kind of a hub and spokes perspective. Next slide. This is just reinforcing that same piece. And the next slide is actually going to show how that actually comes to fruition. Oh, sorry, I take that back. Here is another density map just showing, once again, where the concentrations of not only veterans, but really the population within the area. And the reason that we have white spots, as many of you know, the typology of the area. Those are mountains where there's really no population located. Next slide. All right, so this is the hub and spoke method that's actually showing the feeder of how we are moving forward into ultimately West LA and the critical care center. So all of those outlined smaller dots are the feeders for primary care that are then feeding into that hour drive time, ultimately getting us to our supporting facility of our critical care center. Next slide. And that takes us ultimately to the master plan as we start to look at how does that tie into the South Campus. So now that we have the drivers for healthcare delivery within the market, how do we then establish that service delivery plan and start identifying projects to be able to start satiating that demand within that. And so what we have listed here are a couple of the key components that are being delivered or on the plans of being delivered here in the near term. We're getting ready to actually open the doors on this new regional kitchen. That's been under construction for, I hate to say, for quite a while, but we are doing the last bits of coordination on that. As many of you know, one of the drivers for the delay on that in the market has been a switchgear. Finding a switchgear in the country of late over the last couple of years has been a real challenge. We finally got our switchgear, it's hooked up, but now we just need to do final coordination, get that online. And then as you activate a kitchen, there's a burn-in time associated with that. So all of that equipment that's in the kitchen, the kitchen equipment, there's a testing a period to ensure that it's operating effectively. So anticipate early May in really having that activated and being able to support the South Campus. Previous folks were talking about the purple line and the connection with the metro. That 26 million, part of that in kind was as we move forward with a parking garage as well. And so on the campus, we will actually have number 2 is identified a new parking garage. That is not for Metro, that's for us, but it is being provided by Metro as part of the coordination that we've been doing with them. And then that takes us into a new boiler plant. This is a non-reoccurring maintenance funded item. And then the genesis of what I've been talking about are the CCC projects, and that's 4 and 5. 4 is the critical care center, and then 5 being the central utility plant. So those are those 2 components that are part of this major construction component that as we move forward. Yes, ma'am.
I see sorry, Stephanie Cohen. I see the outline at the top left corner there of the Consolidated Research Facility, but I don't see it listed here, and I don't think that we've talked about that since 2022. Is that incorporated in the future slides, or is that something we could talk about, why it's not on the list, and what the plan is? Because the healthcare facility, the 3 buildings by the Eisenhower Gate that need to be decommissioned, to build housing need to be replaced here. So what, isn't that the research?
Yeah. Correct. This plan is actually showing exactly what you're talking about. I don't have it for this presentation. Actually, there's a little bit of homework that I have associated with the research piece. As we are working the extreme high risk list for seismic requirements, part of that is also looking at what generates and how they are actually identified on that list. There are the series of projects that ultimately we're looking at consolidating from the north down to the south campus. We need to be able to kind of bring that forward. It has languished. And so being able to kind of bring that forward, bring that to Dr. Braverman and Mr. Merchant as well as we identify a strategy and path forward.
Tricia, did you want to ask a question?
I just clarify really quickly. So we don't have a plan in place around the research, the consolidated research facility right now, and it's not being included in this overall plan in this phase.
It has been identified as part of the overall master plan, but the specifics of those requirements have not been identified yet.
Okay.
Yes.
Patricia Washington. So I just wanted to make sure I understood. So the new center is at number 4, which is going to decompress some of the services that we're currently providing in this location. So what's going to be occurring in building 500 in terms of activities thereafter?
Actually, can we go to the next slide? I think part of that will show some of those activities that are coming out. And so here, I will get to ultimately to that. We have a little diagram that shows what stays or what moves into the new facility and what stays in the old facility, just to kind of show what that is. Here is a summary of what those new activities within the critical care center, really talking about, capabilities. So of those 160 beds, here's how they're broken out into different bed categories. The emergency department, 31 treatment rooms, radiology modalities and the breakout of those different modalities. And then the surgical services, a little bit of an uptake in the number of ORs to be able to support that. And then sterile processing, inpatient pharmacy in particular. Actually, I think the slide that I have is probably about 3 or 4, but primarily a lot of our outpatient services, these components that are listed here, these are the triggers that pull the extreme high risk category for the facility. And these are the ones that were identified. If we move those out of the facility, that then removes the extreme high risk designation on building 500.
Mark Welsh, do you want to ask a question?
As the oldest guy in the room and the only guy I think who saw the building of Building 500, why is it unsound? I was around when they poured the footings, put the Teflon on them, and I don't get why it's unsound. And the other question I have is, how are you sure they're going to be a declining market? Do you know when there's going to be less wars?
The first question is probably the easier of the questions. The seismic analysis of the facility itself and some of the engineering has advanced. And so the existing facility is not optimal as we continue to advance codes and requirements moving forward. And so is it a sound building? Yes. Do I worry about us being in here today? No. But really, as we look at, from a risk standpoint, an extreme high risk category for our inpatient facilities, there are things that we can do. This is also an aging facility. Now, in the VA's inventory, it's one of the younger facilities. Our average age of a medical center is 60 years. Right now, built in 77, we're, still under that average age. Now, as for the projection models, the projection models are really based upon the number of veterans that we have serving. And so as we see a decline in the number of veterans being served, okay. But yeah, so it is a projection. It is a projection and so constantly open for analysis. Yes, sir.
Keith Boylan, you're the next question.
Here you go, Mike.
Keith Boylan. I think it was well, I guess not last year, for 2024, now 2022, March, April-ish, the Air Commission report came out and talked about the maintenance and restructuring and so forth, and then since subsequently was semi-scrapped or put on hold, whatever that one, they want to describe that. But a lot of that's going to affect this campus, obviously, the hub and spoke system that you're showing. There was a lot of facilities that perhaps were going to be in the works in those surrounding areas. Is there anything you can add on that? Because obviously with this being a hub for housing as well and your main hub of the medical care system, I'm just wondering how that, with that Air Commission report, kind of on the side for now, how that's going to affect this area.
Absolutely. So the Air Commission was one part, and really that came down to the recommendations coming out of the market assessments that were ultimately being done. And this was the first time that the VA had done a detailed level of market assessments to really identify service delivery planning and gaps within the market. And so that's still valid information and what is being used as one of the drivers and supporting documents for that 160 beds for this facility, but then also some of the other activities that we're doing within the market itself. So it is valid information and that is part of a quadrennial market assessment. So we will get ready to do the next set of market assessments here in the next couple of years.
Next question is from Stephanie Cohen again.
I just want to make sure I understand a few of these things around seismic requirements. So you are planning to transition all acute inpatient services to the new facility. Will there be any inpatient acute services in building 500?
I don't believe so. Can we advance to, I think it's 2 or 3 slides forward. Keep going right there. Perfect. Let's go back one, sorry. Right there. So this is, I'm sorry, it's going to be a little bit hard to read. All of those components that we were showing on the previous slide, those are all those inpatient components that are in now the new hospital component. The building 500 are now the non-acute hospital functions that are going to remain. So, but yes, basic answer to your question is yes.
Okay, and then my last question about seismic is, are VA hospitals statutorily required to comply with California seismic safety standards by 2030? Or are you maybe voluntarily doing that? Do you have a separate set of standards that you have to follow?
Brett, do you know that? I'll have to come back on that.
Okay, I can follow up. I just, oh, there's a stuff, okay.
Correct. We have federal standard that we comply with. And then usually there's a coordination, but let me get more specific details back on that, and I'll go to the seismic advisory group.
That'd be great. And then are we going to talk about budget? Is this project fully funded? Okay.
So it is in our 25 request. Will be in our 25 request.
Patricia, do you have another question?
Patricia Wanjuanko again. So I'm currently working at 2 institutions that made projections that they would, for downsizing, and are now chronically at capacity or excess capacity and can't necessarily meet the needs of the clinical needs. So the question that I have for you is, what is going to be in the event that we now are outstripping our capacity? I guess as a correlate to her question, would we be able to come back into this building and potentially provide clinical services if that's the case, if these projections are not actually in alignment with the needs? Does that,
yes, makes sense. Couple ways to address that. So as we really look at the overall master plan, one of the other opportunities that was discussed, and I don't want to get ahead of myself or really the planning associated with that. But the initial discussions were the development of a ambulatory care center as well. And so as we look at, what Building 500 is or what Building 500 needs to be in the future, is that the existing chassis or does that become even something else? And to your point, I think that becomes the opportunity for validating those numbers in the inpatient side as we move forward.
Ross, this was a super helpful presentation. Do you have a few more slides you got to cover?
I think we actually hit the majority of it. They're really a takeaway for you all, and I owe you more information on seismic. I'm sorry at that, but just look through a last couple. I really, the last thing I would like to leave you with is some of the imagery associated with the new facility, and really a beautiful facility. This stacking diagram, more of an architect nerd thing that I enjoy. The other slide was the increase in the number of ORs. Next slide. Next slide. Parking is going to be big as part of this, and so the integration and coordination of the parking as we move these projects forward is going to be paramount. But the timing of that new Purple Line garage should hit delivery prior to any impacts associated with the construction of the CCC, excuse me. Next slide. And then just a couple quick shots on the architectural renderings of the new facility. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Building 500 in the background on this one. Next slide.
As a chair, I'll just finish with a thought for you. I think this board can help the VA as it thinks about the repurposing of the North Campus buildings. So you're going to face a choice about to what extent you fill some of the vacant space in this building with administrative or other activities. And I think we're going to ask for, not every quarter, but probably every year, an update like this on what's being done for the new critical care facility and what it means for the adjustment of the footprint in the medical area, because that does have effects into the North Campus that we want to be aware of, and we're making master plan recommendations. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. And as was identified, the requirements associated with the research facility, the continued requirements of, what is not only Building 500, but the primary care support within the campus as well. And how does that then support not only the medical district, but really the overall campus and the greater LA area?
Great, thank you again. All right, everyone, so the agenda says we've got 43 minutes for lunch. Be back at 1.
Yeah. So I would like to, tomorrow.
I think she likes to make sure that I don't get out of time.
That's right, I like to see.
You're gonna die.
My clothes are.
Yeah, likewise.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Chelsea Black. I'm from GLA Office of Strategic Facility and Master Planning. Welcome, everybody, to GLA. We are excited to show you a tour of our campus. We have a lot of developments ongoing, both North and South Campus. So Andrew Strain and I are.
I'm Andrew Strain. I'm a program manager in the planning office here at the Greater Los Angeles VA. So we're going to start on the South Campus. We talk a lot about the North and South Campus with Wilshire Boulevard as the dividing line. You heard from some of the presentations this morning around the healthcare facilities that are on the South Campus and plans for the future of the South Campus. So we'll start by walking over to where our Welcome Center is. And we can talk more about the services that are provided for unhoused veterans out of the Welcome Center in Building 402. That's where the buses are staged to pick us up. We'll take those buses over and check out the new kitchen construction that's happening on the South Campus. Talk a little bit more about how this both supports the healthcare and operations of the facility, as well as the goals to build housing via the building that it's replacing on the North Campus. From there, we'll drive up past the Metro construction site, do kind of a windshield view of what Metro's got going on with the Purple Line subway construction. We'll hang a left and check out our care treatment and rehabilitative services program, or CTRS. These are tiny shelters. That's a real innovative program that we have here at GLA for emergency shelter for veterans living on the streets. We'll meet with the program manager there, Shannon Santini, and check out one of the drop-in units. From there, we'll drive further north past the area that the town center is planned to be. We'll see some of the construction of housing that's in the works at the moment. We'll stop and do a tour of Building 207, which is open permanent supportive housing that has 59 units for veterans age 62 and older. We'll meet with the property management and services team there, who will show us the building. From there, we will get back on the bus and drive further north to where the majority of the other housing construction is happening and see some of the new construction sites, see some of the housing that's open in Building 205, 208, and 209, and see some of the recreation and amenities that are on the perimeter of the property. Then back in the bus, and we'll do a windshield of some of the other areas like UCLA's baseball field and the columbarium site and our CLC's domicile area. So I know that's a lot, and it's one thing to talk about it, but to see it in person is, I think, hopefully going to be very enlightening to this board. So with that being said, we can turn it over to Rob Eglins and get a move.
We're ready to go. I encourage everyone just to leave their briefcases here because we're going to be on the bus. Eugene is going to stay in the conference room, so that won't be an issue. Let's go see the campus.
Not enough, apparently. Sure. Yeah, we.
Okay, thank you. Thank you every time.